Hello. Is anybody home? Is it just me and Alchemy and me? How's everyone doing? I almost missed my own live stream there. I was printing out stuff. I thought I saw I've got like half an hour, and I looked at my watch. I was like, oh my god, I've got 1 minute. I had to run to the machine. Let me know that you're here and I'm not talking to myself, and then we'll dive straight in, because we've got a lot to cover, probably more to cover than we've got enough time. So yeah, we're gonna have to be incredibly efficient with our time today. So yeah, let me know what's going. Pop into the chat, say hello. Alchemy and me, hello. Wesker, how's it going? Macy, how are ya? Good evening, those of you UK and Europe. Good afternoon, I believe, those of you in the States. Frank, hello. Chocolate peach. I was like, chocolate piaki. No, chocolate peach, how you doing? welcome. MJ, what's going on, Caribbean girl? Talia, always good to see you. Mika, hello. We'll play this game at least for the next 5 minutes. Let people filter in, because once we're started, we're literally just gonna hit the ground running. So yeah, let's play the next, few minutes, allowing people. Hello, Nkem from Egypt. How you doing? It's good to have you here. Another couple minutes. I think 5 past will be the target time for us to get underway, and anyone who comes after that time will just need to catch up. We have 41 people in the room, 48, 46 likes. Hit the likes up so people can join us, and I think when we hit the magic number of 100, I'll get cracking. Yeah, let's do it that way. Jeffrey, how are you doing? Good to see ya. Congo, yeah, Ngolo, nice to meet you. I'm Congolese, living in France. I'm very well. I hope you're okay too. Frank from Atlanta, how you doing? David, London, big up. Mika from Harlem. Still need a few more to join. Jonathan, ever present, and has just given me a donation. Thank you so much. Said #1 fan. I appreciate it. I'm a fan of yours as well, by the way. Jonathan's a part of our Discord. If you haven't joined that, by the way, I think the link is in the description. That's always a place where you can learn something new. I do get a lot of inspiration from what I'm going to produce in terms of content, and also get a lot of research, because it's like having a team, really, to be honest with you. I get papers, I get all sorts from those guys. So yeah, Jonathan, thank you very much for your $10 donation. I really appreciate it. Arza Blue, Macy and KC, Angel from Wisconsin, how you doing? Charles, we've got 60 concurrent viewers. I might start, maybe give it another couple minutes, even if I don't, I might start even if we don't hit 100. No big deal, we'll hit it at some point. We got too much to cover, so I think at that note, we've hit 60. It's just after 5 past. Morris has just walked in, and RJ, and we'll take that as our sign to go. So welcome everybody, thank you for joining me here on the King's Monologue. And what can I say, you haven't heard from me for a while, and the reason you haven't heard from me for a while is because those of you who are maybe active on the channel will note that I've been writing a paper, and that's not to say that it's taken up every last minute of my life. It has taken up quite a lot of my life to actually get the paper written and then marked, and then going back and making edits to the paper to the point where I was satisfied that I was going to release a version of it. So the version that I posted on my YouTube channel yesterday, and it has lots, I think it had lots of downloads yesterday, by the way. I think over 400 downloads, which is great. So I'm honored that many of you are that interested to download I don't know, a 30 to a 40 page, academic paper on a specific subject. But it's taken up a lot of my life doing that. And it all stems back to I'm going to say, debate that I've become embroiled in. And actually, funny enough, this debate actually dates back to June of last year. So the recent the recent leg of this debate started around just over a month ago, I believe, when I did my critique of the Amenhotep III reconstruction, which I thought was god awful, and I still do. I'm just gonna I'm not gonna open up the full image, but you could probably just about see it here in this thumbnail. I'm circling it with my mouse. Okay, so there's the Amenhotep III reconstruction, which I thought was, and I still think is, god awful. In fact, now I've done my paper, I think it's even worse now, because I see some of the things that the author, the errors that they make, and I've pointed them out quite, I think, succinctly in my paper. But this actually started last year, June, when I did my Tutankhamun reconstruction, and then Cicero did his first Tutankhamun reconstruction. And those of you who are on the channel back then will note that I actually said I feel like this is a response to the work I'm doing. And I felt like it for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons was I could see a little bit of a kind of like effort for the first time to take into the account the artwork, and that was deliberate. But then I also done a subsequent video when I was really worried about the way that they had traced his skull in the 3D approximation, and they had kind of changed his cephalic index, they had changed his orthognathic region, which is kind of like around the jaw. They'd made very subtle but significant changes, and they'd moved his spine and made it larger, quite considerably larger. And I found that very worrying. And I spoke about that last year. So I spoke about that nearly a year ago now. I spoke about that. And who would think, a year later, it's, come back 360, and I'm embroiled in a, public debate, a relatively public debate with the reconstruction artist, whose profile since then has grown significantly. He gets stuff published in mainstream papers very, very effortlessly. But I feel like he probably wasn't prepared for the level of debate we were going to take into. And RJ says she remembers. RJ, I'm making an assumption that, I don't know why in my head I thought you were a girl. You're probably a guy. Let me know. I have no idea why, but you're RJ anyway. You don't even have to say. Don't even feel any pressure to reveal your gender if you don't want to. But yes, RJ remembers last year when I raised these several issues that I had, and who would have thought a year later those same issues are coming back, and actually have had to address them in a far more rigorous and academic way, which is what I've done in my paper. So just to give everybody your brother, thank you RJ, and I should have known that. I don't know why I got my wires crossed. So this is just to give it a quick TLDR. I criticised the Amenhotep III reconstruction that I've pointed out to you on a few live streams and a couple of live streams. The author responded with a written paper to address my errors or refute me. I thought his refutation was very easy to debunk, so I took his refutation online, did another live stream where I point by point went through the entire paper, as you guys know that I do this whenever I have any kinds of debate, be it with himself or Metatron or anybody else. You know that I won't take people out of context. I don't do that. I will read the paper entirely or watch a video entirely, because it's really important that they understand, listen, we don't have to do any manipulation here. We're not running from you, we're not running from your points. I actually find it relatively easy to debunk lies, because they're lies. It's much more difficult to debate with someone when you've both got a standpoint or a viewpoint that is, divergent to one another, but you both have an element of truth in what you're saying. That's actually a much more difficult discussion / argument to have. But when someone knowingly or unknowingly is defending a position that I know is indefensible, so this reconstruction of Amenhotep III is indefensible, You're not going to find the anthropological data to support it. You're not going to find the cultural data to support it. You're not going to find linguistic data to support it. You're not going to find the artwork to support it. So it's quite easy for me to sit here and say, that's a load of rubbish, and what, you know, how do you want to do battle? Basically, you pick the battlefield. How do you want to do this? Do you cultural, anthropology, linguistics, genetics? Which one? You pick them. You pick the battlefield, and we'll go. Anthropometrics, yeah, let's do it. I know for a fact you will not win. There's no possibility that you can win, because you are standing and trying to defend an indefensible position. And this is the first time I feel like Cicero has ever had to defend his work. And I think it's probably really frustrating him. Obviously, I know he had a relatively public spat with the Egyptian antiquities, you know, the I can't remember exactly what they're called, the Department of Egyptian Antiquities or whatever, you know, the Hawass and his team, who discredited him because basically all you got to do is sneeze, and if the word kind of like Negro or black comes out of your mouth, they're going to ban you from everything. So he's done a couple of reconstructions that were black, and he kind of uses that as his kind of like justification for, oh, I can't be racist. Look, when I did this reconstruction, this was a black man, that was a black man. So yeah, you did those. I didn't particularly think those were very good myself anyway, but that's objective. So that's subjective. That's totally my point of view, but I addressed the reasons in my paper why I wasn't massive fans of those reconstructions either. But going off a tangent, the point I'm making is that that's not justification to think that you could come out with a reconstruction like this and not be challenged. We will challenge you. We will challenge you on this channel, and from what I can see in this community, in the comments from you guys so often, you will take people to town, because this isn't, you know, I feel like there's and before I dive into what we're doing today fully, I do feel like there's this preconception that people have, and it's very much an arrogance when they kind of come into contact and discussion with people like myself, that is people of African or African diaspora or black origins. This kind of idea that we're not thorough, we're not rigorous, you're just gonna throw out a few terms, you know, a few keywords and a little bit of jargon, you know, an academic paper, and we're gonna suddenly coil into the corner without an ability to defend ourselves. It's like, sorry mate, wrong channel. You're in the wrong place. We absolutely, like I said, how do you want to do battle on this? Because your standpoint is ridiculous, and we're not just gonna sit and shout that it's ridiculous. And I think a few people do sometimes misunderstand me. And as we're going through my paper today, so actually to give you a full synopsis, today we'll be going through my paper. So I'm just letting you know that now. That's what today's session is going to be. All right. I might not read it in full. I might kind of like skip over, but I want you by the end of today's session to get a gist of what my paper is about and why I think my paper is important. And I'll obviously be writing several more papers in the future. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to be looking at my paper. And the reason we'll be going through my paper is to make it clear, listen, we don't have to shout, okay? I don't have to get on some kind of like, you know, now who do you think you're talking to? We don't have to do any of that. Like, we can talk this low tone, high tone, medium tone, whatever tone you like, but the bottom line is you're not going to come out of this discussion with a victory. It's just not going to happen. It's an impossibility. It's not going to happen. So we're going to go through my paper today, and we're going to highlight several of the reasons why there's a problem in the field of forensic facial reconstruction. So we're going to do a bit of deconstructing work on the field as a whole, but then we're going to really drill in to Mr. Moraes' processes and some of the very glaring errors and problems which is leading him to make really, I'm going to use the word bad reconstructions like this. Is a bad reconstruction. Okay? That's what he's doing. He's creating a bad reconstruction. So we're going to hopefully help him. He's reading my paper today. He's told me, me and him are frenemies, by the way, on we DM each other, very antagonistic, but also, you know, there's a degree of mutual respect. I'm going to respect him for engaging in this way. He could run away or run behind the usual defense systems that a lot of Eurocentrists do, refuse to engage you directly in battle. And I'm not giving him the label of a Eurocentrist, although he does lots of Eurocentric things. But he's willing to continue this discussion, which is good. It definitely shows a degree of bravery. And also, I will tell you this, he's written another paper that I'm not going to be sharing on this live stream, but I will be debunking in a subsequent live stream, quite possibly in the next couple of days. That's what I was printing out, so I think I'm going to read that today, and then maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, as a community, we'll go through that paper as well, because he's making lots of errors. But the funny thing is how much of an impact we have had on him. This channel has irrevocably changed him, and he'll deny that. You would have seen my post yesterday where I spoke about the fact that, look, they've done a new Ramesses II reconstruction, and I have to put my hands up. That is entirely my fault. That new Ramesses II reconstruction, it's entirely my fault. The entire paper is addressing the arguments that we used to skillfully debunk his work in the live streams that we had, and his new reconstruction, which takes so much more account of the artwork, which is something he's never done before. He's doing that because of us, and he's even using our tools like, anthropology, anthropometrics and all this stuff that he never encountered before. He's using this erroneously, by the way, to find justification, and I find it hilarious. So this is what's happening here. We are literally changing this. I'm thinking a year from now, the landscape of facial reconstructions might have changed. I'm talking about mainstream, not our landscape. We've got our reconstructions, but I'm talking about mainstream. They're not going to be able to ignore us for much longer. I'm telling you that right now. Macy, thank you very much for your $10 donation. Just going to pop your comment on the screen. It says they have no facts, just delusional fantasies and wishful thinking. Unfortunately, they have entire systems to support these illusions. Absolutely. I'm not going to disagree with that. Really appreciate that. And Henry says, with the €2 donation, thank you very much. Just do your GED match live and show them once and for all. I don't know. Well, sorry, I should probably know what that is. Can someone tell me what a GED match is? I could Google it, but I'm live right now and I can't be bothered. Yeah, let me know what that is, because I don't know what it is. All right, so back to the order. So very quickly, he did a reconstruction of Tutankhamun. I kind of praised some elements of it because it was better than previous ones, but really didn't like the 3D reconstruction of the skull. Then he does the reconstruction of Amenhotep III, which I obviously completely refuted and debunked live. He then answered my live stream and believed he refuted my points. I then answered his paper and I think thoroughly refuted the points that he made on the paper. And then I wrote my own paper, which I've just published, but since then he's published a new paper which we're not going to cover today, but I'm going to go through my paper with you guys. Synopsis over. Everyone clear? 155 concurrent viewers live. Let's get going. All right, by the way, guys, let me know if the format's okay for you. There's not going to be that much. There is pictures in the paper, okay, but this isn't going to be kind of one of those fast paced, we're watching a bit of pictures, or we're looking at pictures, watching some videos, blah blah blah. I'm literally going to be reading for a lot of this, but I think the reading aspect is going to be valuable because I'll be able to contextualize a lot of my thoughts. So if you start, let me do a quick survey. 153, it's gone down now, live at the moment. Could you let me know in the comments if you've read the paper? I'll be very surprised because I only gave it to you yesterday. It's quite a long paper, it's for all intents and purposes the length of a short book. But let me know if you've read it, or how much of it you've read, or if you're intending to read it. Just spam the chat now. I just want to kind of get a bit of a feeling. In fact, I should probably do a survey. I wonder if I can do a survey, a poll. Here we go. Start a poll. In fact, yeah. Don't just spam the chat. Let me do it so quickly. So, have you read the paper? ? And the answer is going to be yes. In full, yes in part. How do I add? Can I add thingamajiggies here? Should be able to add thingy. Here we go. Not started yet. And then the final one's gonna be will not read. Will not read. Be honest, by the way, as well. I'm not gonna condemn anyone who says will not read. Start poll. Let's see if this works. First time I've done this, by the way. Boom, there you go. So in the chat now, there's a poll. Click, click, click. Even if you've left a comment, click, click, click. Click the poll. This is interesting. This is quite fun. I haven't done a poll before. Okay, so let me. It's doing this weird thing. Oh, 1 second. I'm just clicking random comments now, trying to get this working. Alright. Dear. Yeah, I think it's because I'm using it in a pop-up box. Is that the reason why it's gone all weird? Let me, wait a second. Down there. No. It's doing weird things. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I've got it now. All right, so cool. Let me. I'm gonna end the poll now, guys. For those of you, I'm just gonna quickly. Oh crap! Sorry, excuse my French. I had it and then it disappeared. There we go. Wait, come on. It's doing some really weird things. There. Okay, end poll. Boom. Oh, does it not display the results? Oh my goodness me. Well, I think most people said not started yet. Let me read through some of the comments. That was a big fail. I thought it was gonna like publish the results so everyone could see them, but it just closed it. Sorry. Okay. So let me just go through. Hasn't read the paper, sir. Factant. I skimmed it last night, but waited for you to go over on the stream. Fair enough. Willie, I'm sorry, Wesker, read it. Thank you, my brother. They're watching us. Blah blah blah. 25 pages in, Frank. Good stuff. That's a good showing. I've read most of the paper. Thank you, Talia. Downloaded it. Haven't read it yet. That's fine. Miss C, plan to read it today. Great. Is there a link? There's a link. You might have to find the post. Can someone put the link to the paper in the chat? Actually, that would probably make sense, wouldn't it? Don't open up when we're doing a live stream. I mean, you can and read along if you want to. Okay, cool. All right, you guys saw the results. Great. That's good. They're not showing it to me. All right, brilliant. Let's get started. Okay, that was. Oh, thank you. OGP has just literally pasted the results here. So there you go. 76% said yes in part. That's really good. 13% said yes in full. 5% said will not read. Wait, no. Sorry, 76% said not started yet. I thought that was a bit high. 30% said yes in part. 5% said yes in full. So that's nearly 20% of you have at least started reading it, which is excellent. And then 3% said will not read, which is absolutely fine. 51% of okay, brilliant. 51 votes. Let's go. Thank you, guys. So you can see I like to do these weird things every now and then, but let's get cracking. Bada boom. So like I said, I mean, I could jump around. Oh no, that's not a good sign. My laptop's just so low battery. Sorry, that means my charger's not connecting properly. Okay, there you go. It's disappeared. I hope that holds. That's so annoying. All right, let me zoom in. All right, so here's the paper. It's called Reassessing the Facial Reconstruction of Amenhotep III, Analysis of Methodological and Anthropological Flaws. So this is really a paper of two parts, okay? First of all is the anthropological flaws, okay, which we're going to cover in some detail. And then there's the methodological flaws. That's the flaws in the method that's being taken by the reconstruction artists. So the issues really are anthropology is by and large being neglected or selectively used, and methodology is poor. Okay, so let's dive in and see. What did I just open there? Close up. Let's dive in and get a grasp for it. So Abstract. Forensic facial reconstruction of the ancient Egyptian king Amenhotep III was recently produced by Brazilian graphic designer and reconstruction artist Cicero Moraes. Moraes is working with Australian researcher Michael Habicht, who will from here and be referred to as the multinational team. So I just call them multinational team, it's a bit easier. The finished reconstruction has generated some controversy due to its light-skinned and phenotypically Eurasian appearance. By the way, can I just say really quickly, yeah? Some of you will be like, when I first wrote this paper, it was quite a bit more aggressive, and I had a really excellent doctor, actually, a doctor of history, actually, marked this paper for me, and he helped me to tone down my language. I won't mention his name, although I really want to, because I'm going to get him on the channel one of these days. But he gave up, it must have been a long time, because I gave him a very long paper, which he cut down substantially. And he marked it with so much detail for me. Now, this is kind of like, where it is now is like 80% of the way in terms of the corrections that he placed on there. But I'm really grateful to him, and I'll reveal who he is as soon as I get the okay from him, because I haven't asked for permission to mention his name, so I'm not going to. So it's generated some controversy due to its visibly light skin and phenotypically Eurasian appearance. The representation contradicts numerous historical portraits, bas-reliefs, papyrus artworks, and statues which depict the king visibly dark-skinned individual with features commonly associated with native Africans. Okay, and we're going to cover all this as well together. This paper critiques the reconstruction by addressing two primary issues: the overall omission of African ethnographic data and anthropological data gathering within Egyptology. Now, this point here, the reason I'm just pausing on that really quickly, is one that we're going to revisit quite a bit. We're going to revisit the fact that they just ignore Africa. All of these Egyptologists, all of these reconstruction artists, it's like Africa doesn't exist. They don't know anything about the continent. They don't. So all the stuff that we do on this channel, that we really take for granted, that we understand phenotypic diversity. Anyone on this channel understands the difference in looks that you get from Northeast Africa to East to Central East to Southeast to West to Central. We all understand how much variety these places have, and many of these people do not appreciate that, so they just ignore it. Okay, and specific methodological inconsistencies by the multinational team during the reconstruction process that's resulted in Eurocentric bias. Now, I think sometimes it's deliberate, and I said an unjustifiable European appearance. So this is where I'm going to zoom in a bit more. Okay, so this is just a little screenshot to hopefully allow everybody to digest where the controversy comes from. These are depictions of Amenhotep III, each consistent with one another and consistent to his look throughout his life, and this is their reconstruction, which literally just did the exact opposite that the statues did. This is one of the reasons why I find it very, very frustrating. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to zoom in a bit as well. I hope this I have found that I might reformat this document because it's not the most friendly, this 2-column format. Okay, that's maybe a bit too far. Let me zoom out a little bit. That's giving me a headache. Okay, cool. So let's start. The portrayal of ancient Egyptian rulers, particularly in forensic facial reconstruction, has long been a subject of scholarly debate and public interest. Recently, a forensic facial reconstruction of Amenhotep III, produced by a multinational team of researchers from Australia and Brazil, has prompted some criticism for its portrayal of the king with overtly Eurasian appearance. This representation stands in stark contrast to the historical depictions such as portraits, bas-reliefs, and statues which consistently depict Amenhotep III as a visibly African individual of Northeast African stock. These inconsistencies highlight significant issues with the methodologies employed in forensic facial reconstruction as a whole and the broader anthropological approaches in Egyptology. Now, just to be clear, I would have just preferred to say a black African individual, but the word black is very loaded and in the context of discussion sometimes really meaningless. So before I had discussed what race was, which is something that I do in this paper, I try to avoid using the word black. So if you're wondering why haven't you just said black, that's the reason why. It's important to give context to what race is before you start using terms which don't have any scientific basis, like black and white, which aren't scientific terms. They're social terms that we spoke about many times on this. So Factip, thank you very much for your donation. Said Richard III looks like his art, but no Egyptian looks like theirs. It's either deliberate or reconstruction is not a science. You might, I think you said you hadn't read the paper, but you might be psychic, because I mentioned this in this paper. The fact that when they did the reconstruction, they adhered vehemently to Richard III's portraits. Like, suddenly his portraits were good enough for them to not care about anything else, not to follow the contours of the skull and try to produce exactly what the skull gave them, but to say the skull is just going to be a template for us to recreate this portrait. And that's exactly what they did. So very good point you've just raised there. Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to pop that off the screen because we're doing reading today. Now, although this part of the study will specifically be critiquing the approach and results of the multinational team, who I've mentioned before with Cicero and Dr. Habicht, it should be stated the same critique could be applied to any number of modern reconstruction teams, and that's really important. Okay, and then I go on to say that obviously I've formed a bit of a kind of love-hate relationship with Mr. Moraes. I commend him for his work. He's quite respected, and he does have a spine, which goes a long way in my view, okay, in this field, for people to actually defend their work and to be willing to engage you and not to run behind their usual, you know, institutions of safety like they do. So I'm always going to respect that. It doesn't mean I'm going to be nice about what you do though, and I'm not nice. I'm actually quite scathing in this report for obvious reasons. In many ways, I'm just going to carry on from here. It must be stated that my critique of their reconstruction is acting as a conduit to a wider, more far-reaching issue associated with bias, nationalism, politics, and the racially volatile foundations of the entire field of Egyptology. So that's really, really key here. All right, that's what's driving a lot of this, and this ultimately causes professionals involved in the field, knowingly or unknowingly, to act outside of their usual protocols and make professional compromises that result in the perpetuation of Eurocentric tropes and fabricated truths. So that's when we come on to our first section. It says there's shortcomings in anthropology contributing to bias. In the discipline of anthropology and academia, the general omission of systematic data gathering from African populations manifests itself in several ways. So I want you to just quickly think about the point that I'm raising there. When they do these studies, they never try. All of these things rely on data gathering from somewhere. You need to gather data, but data is never gathered from the African continent for any reason. And in avoiding data and in avoiding having to engage in the African continent, in African people, in black people, they basically deliberately put blinkers on, and they kind of like, they paint themselves into a corner, and it's done deliberately, because it's kind of like, well, if we pretend these people don't exist and we never acknowledge that they exist, then we will never accidentally create them. And that's a very deliberate thing that's being done. So let's quickly have a read here. So it says, the incorrect assumption that Africans exhibit a single or narrow subset of phenotypes, sometimes referred to as the true Negro trope, comes from a limited idea of race propagated by Seligman. Okay, so this idea that there's one kind of Negro, and he talked about drawing a line from the mouth of the Senegal River through to Khartoum. So basically drawing a line across the Sahel of Africa. Everyone who falls below it is a Negro, and everyone who's above it is either a Hamite or a Semite, and therefore essentially white or light-skinned. Now, this thinking might not be exactly what people think, but they do still think along these lines. Hence, they're always trying to push that sub-Saharan African. Sub-Saharan African is just a new way of saying Negroid, okay? And North African is just a new way of saying Hamite or Semite. The international team failed to reference any investigation or data gathering on the African continent, even with the target population of their reconstruction. There's also the dismissal of Egyptian artwork as symbolic rather than accurate. Now, this is a common theme. He mentioned that in his rebuttal paper to me. The artwork is symbolic. The artwork is standardized. That's literally what he said, word for word. It doesn't match. It's standardized. Hilariously enough, though, he's completely U-turned and contradicted himself now, because he's actually, in both his Tutankhamun reconstruction and his new Ramesses II reconstruction has admitted that the artwork is consistent. Okay, and he's admitted that the artwork has some, there's clearly some credibility to it. Now, this hasn't caused him to change the appearance or the race of his reconstructions, but it shows that he's completely changed his viewpoint. Once again, you can credit us for him doing that. So that's quite important to note that there. And just to quote him, he said, works of art in addition to not being based on the skull. So his whole premise before was, well, it's either based on the skull or it isn't. If it's not based on the skull, then it's just a work of art and shouldn't be taken into context. And we kind of like, well, both can be true. We do realize that. The misinterpretation and subsequent misrepresentation of mummified soft tissue as resembling individuals in their living state. Now, this term soft tissue is one that comes up and will continue to come up quite a lot. So I want you to get familiar with it. And soft tissue is essentially everything that's not the skeleton. Okay, so when they talk about soft tissue, we're talking about skin, muscles, cartilage, fat, water, all of those things that basically make up what a human looks like. And this whole idea that when you get a mummy that's been, and we talk about this in some detail in the paper, so I'm not going to go through it now, but mummified soft tissue resembling individuals in their living state is stupid. You have to take into account the kind of metamorphosis that's taken place. Mr. Moraes falsely asserted that the nose of the mummy does not follow the shape of the statues without considering the mummification or natural aging process and its effect on the physical phenotype of the individuals. The refusal to acknowledge the existence of contemporary African populations that phenotypically and genetically match Egyptian anatomies in respect of complexion, anthropometrics, and genetic assessment of the individual in question. Now, this is a massive one because it's only, and I really want to drive this point home, you're only going to find people that match the ancient Egyptians on every vertical in Africa, amongst Africa's quote-unquote black populations. You have to create phantom races or, mysterious races of people that no longer exist in order to have their logic. But if you go to the African continent, you will find people with the exact craniometric traits, the exact anthropometric traits, the same genetics, the same physical proportions, and the same colour and features that you'd see on the statues and the artwork, all sitting within single tribes in Africa. And you'll find many of them. But we have to believe that the ancient Egyptians were some kind of, phantom tribe of, pale-skinned, African-limbed people. It's ridiculous, okay? And this is one of the things we don't see Occam's razor being applied when it comes to the possible appearance of the ancient Egyptians. Let's carry on. What is this? Go away. Dismiss. Oh, have I messed that up on there? People who could be faithfully associated as being ethnically analogous to him. So that's just talking about what I was talking about there. Finally, the erroneous classification of traits shared between Europeans and Africans as Caucasoid or Nordic, as opposed to African features in origin. Okay, results in researchers like Mr. Moraes and team to unfortunately misclassify perfectly normal expressions of African phenotypic diversity as being the result of admixture or more often foreign Caucasoid origin. I must press this point home. Okay, you see a shared trait, narrow nasal passage. Oh, he must be mixed. Oh, there must be mixed ancestry. No, it's just a black person with a narrow nasal passage. They see slightly thinner lips, or they see a skull shape that's maybe not as long as it doesn't matter what it is. They always will infer some kind of Caucasoid admixture. And actually, there are many people in the African community who do this as well. Many independent researchers in the African community who do this as well, where they will say, oh, the ancient Egyptians were a mixed population, blah, 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 because they don't understand, actually, these are native expressions of phenotypic diversity. And I can show you thousands of Africans who look like this. Sadly, many of those outdated beliefs have persisted in the practices attached to Egyptology, a legacy of racism inherited from the early years of the discipline. Now, then we move on. Just want to say a quick thank you to Macy. Thank you very much. She said, we want the truth to be told and won't settle for less, and neither should we. Why should we settle for less? Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Just pop that up really quickly to give my thank you, and then I'm going to pop it down again, if you don't mind, so I can not block the screen, because I know I'll forget and then you guys will start screaming at me. Now, addressing the methodological flaws. Now, this is where it gets good, because at the moment, right now, I've kind of just been on the entire field of, you know, forensic. These are the anthropological issues that I was talking about, but actually the methodological flaws are really interesting. So this is the part of the paper where I really do, I'm not gonna lie, come for Mr Moraes and the multinational team, but also the entire field of forensic facial reconstruction. And I think actually quite a good job of really laying bare many of the issues that exist. So let's quickly go through these methodological flaws. First of all, so in terms of the multinational team, they have a reliance on third-party images of the skull. So what they do essentially is they gather images from the net, CT scans, ultrasound scans, and a lot of photographs as well, which he failed to mention, but yes, all kind of 3 of those together, and he'll use these to create a 3D representation. This 3D reconstruction of the skull, in the case of the reconstruction of Amenhotep III, was treated as the absolute authority for the likeness of the subject. So now he's created this skull from all these images. It's kind of like, well, this skull, this 3D representation is all that matters. I don't need any anthropology, apart from recently. Now he started including anthropology because we've taken him to task, which is important. An apparent lack of expertise in African phenotypes and omission of African ethnographic and phenotypic data led to Eurocentric bias. So I speak about this quite extensively. He doesn't understand Africa, and I'm going to say that quite plainly. Okay, Mr Moraes and the multinational team don't understand Africa. They understand nothing about Africa. They understand nothing about different African phenotypes. They've given no indication or evidence that they understand anything about the African continent, certainly not enough to be able to be creating faces of what Africans look like. This bias is evident in the selective use of artwork and anthropological data. The inaccurate digital reconstruction of the skull increased the likelihood of errors and bias in the outcomes of the reconstruction. So this is a major error, and I've addressed this with him directly, and I haven't had a satisfactory answer. I'm going to put it plainly, he creates his 3D reconstructions of the skull incorrectly every time. And I'm going to show you examples of this. His 3D representations of the skull are never the same as the skull itself, and he deliberately introduces things that push the skull towards being more Eurocentric, and I'm going to prove that as well, so make sure you stay tuned. The selective inclusion of unjustified exaggeration of Amenhotep III's obesity, which is not based on sound anthropological research. Okay, I think he just found one quote in one study that said Amenhotep was fat. And then he actually exposes himself. I'm not going to go into this, but in his latest study, he said, we made him fat because there's one statue where his face looks fat. So bear in mind, he has like dozens of statues. They found one statue where his face looks fat, so therefore they made him fat. And I'm gonna prove that when I cover that. I just don't want to sidetrack and go into the new paper that you guys haven't seen yet. So remember why I said that from the start. The reason they make Amenhotep III fat is because he has a wide African face, and the only way Europeans or Eurasians have wide faces is when they're fat. So they're like, oh, how can we explain this wide African face? I know, he must be a fat white man. No. Okay? No, I'm sorry, he's not. And yeah, we're going to cover that anyway. The inclusion of this detail contradicts Mr. Moraes' claim, let's go scroll over a little bit there, that historical anthropology did not impact his reconstruction process. So on the one hand, I criticize quite openly and say, you're not using the artwork. He's like, all I need is the skull. I don't need any of your anthropology. Apart from the art anthropology that tells me that he was a fat man. I'll take that part. I'm sorry, that's selective. And this whole issue of being selective in their use of anthropology is what creates many of the issues in this process. Next, the attribution of pale skin is entirely unsupported. by any historical evidence and therefore a choice. Mr Moraes failed to address the criticism even in his paper addressing the controversy, only stating that his reconstruction was not white and that he avoided bias using objective grayscale, both claims of which I'll be refuting in this paper. So basically, they don't justify choosing white or choosing pale skin. The only thing that you'll notice they do is they create polemic arguments against him being black. Oh, he's not black, he's not black, he's not. Okay, cool, he's not black. All right, let's say he's not black. Devil's advocate. Prove that he was tan-skinned, pale, or Arab. Oh, no, it's just the default. That's not good enough. And this is the thing, all they can do is create polemic arguments against Afrocentrism or against people who believe he was black, and apologetic arguments as to why. In fact, they don't even justify the fact that they're white. They don't do that. It's just like, well, this is the color we've chosen. There's no anthropology. We just like cream. It's like, that's not sufficient. It's not sufficient and it's not satisfactory. Finally, the overemphasis of alleged scientific processes. And you notice I put scientific in quotations because, as I've stated many times, you can put all the formulas you want around this process of forensic racial reconstruction, but it's not science. And what they're practicing is not science. It's art, okay? It's just an evolved form of art. It's entirely subjective and it lacks any of the precision or the rigor for you to act like it's more superior than anyone else's approach. And I don't think it is. Attempt to elevate the approximated facial estimates produced by Mr Moraes and team over the countless contemporaneous historical portraits, which I think is ludicrous. You can't just come and make something from the skull and say it's better than the people who created his face when he was alive over several years. This, in my view, is disingenuous claim that exploits public ignorance of the substantial limitations of facial approximation, of which he is aware. And we're going to go through those. He's aware of them. Carolyn Wilkinson is aware of them. Elizabeth Darnes is aware of them. All of these reconstruction artists are aware of the inherent limitations in the practice, and yet he'll push it as though, well, you know, my skull is more important than the artwork. It's absolutely ludicrous, particularly in the absence of supporting anthropological data. Now, this is where I have a little bit of a summary in terms of the purpose of the paper. This study calls for better scrutiny and inclusion of all anthropological data, including diverse African anthropological data, which they pretend doesn't exist, and the involvement of indigenous African and diaspora African researchers in the future reconstructions to ensure accurate and respectful representations are produced. We also advise an elevation of the status of the skillfully crafted Egyptian portraiture so that where it is available, it should be held in equal regard to classical and even modern era portraiture, not just discarded as standardized, stylized artwork because you don't like how black it is. I think that's a very fair premise to put towards them. African phenotypic diversity. So this is where I go into a bit of African phenotypic diversity before we dive into the main paper. Some of you are going like, we're not in the main paper yet. No, we're just getting cooking. Bear with me. We will get there. It's very detailed. Okay. The omission of African reference data in Egyptological research is a major factor contributing to skewed results in numerous studies. Prevailing misconceptions include the belief that Africans only exhibit a single homogeneous or very few phenotypes, whilst Eurasians are seemingly approached as an almost infinitely diverse. So we'll scroll up. Whoops. Oh crap, what did I just do? That got too far. Okay, I'm struggling here. Infinitely diverse. Down here. Okay, I think it's just no, one more. Sorry guys. There we go. Infinitely diverse group. Okay. And I've quoted there a paper by Farkas, and I think I actually covered this paper with you guys, and that paper was the one that basically did anthropological studies in which 17 data sets were used to identify European phenotypic diversity and 3 were used for African phenotypic diversity. So Africa, all of Africa's faces can be represented in 3 groups, 3 ethnic groups. but Europe requires 17. So you can see that's a clear bias towards Europeans, even though Africans are far more phenotypically diverse. Furthermore, there's a persistent refusal to acknowledge contemporary African populations that are anthropomorphically and genetically aligned with ancient Egyptians. And I quote here, the Robbins, that's the anthropometric study, Jordi, the genetic study, and Makota, that's the study on skin pigmentation, proving they were black. This is typified by the tendency to erroneously classify any shared traits that exist between Europeans and Africans as Caucasoids. So this is important. Once again, when we share traits, they claim them. And we have to really be willing, or not even willing, we have to make it a habit to challenge this kind of false information, of them claiming stuff that belongs to us, Oh, that's Caucasoid. Well, narrow nose, that's Caucasoid. Oh, wavy hair, that's Caucasoid. No, we, all due respect, and don't want to use the word we, but we were here first by a very, very long shot. And we were exhibiting those traits before modern Europeans even existed. So they shouldn't get to label any of our features Caucasoid. We should be in the habit of saying, oh, look, he has an aquiline African nose. When we see the Roman nose, call it the Roman nose. No, it's not a Roman nose. It's an aquiline African nose. Okay? That's what it is. All of these features are African. But anyway, let me carry on. Or at very least, evidence of some kind of recent European admixture. Shared traits such as straight noses, wavy hair, or light skin are never considered to be native African features. And I included lighter skin deliberately because I've spoken already about the fact that Africans have 100 genes that determine our complexions, and there's a study done by Rick Kittles, which I didn't mention here. I've mentioned it before, where he did a study on African Americans and he found no correlation between the complexion of their skin and their African genetic component. In fact, he found people who were 100% of African ancestry and at the very light skin spectrum. And he found, what a study also found, is only when you got to, basically the more people mixed, the less they were able to access dark skin. But being fully African didn't give you any restriction in terms of accessing light skin. So I'll drop that there and let you just consider that, because that's really important. So anyway, let me carry on. The recurring theme being that even though it is acknowledged that mankind, although spending the majority of their existence as modern man on the African continent, only suddenly began to develop diverse phenotype and genotype upon migration from the African continent. Africa is regarded for some reason as incapable of its own indigenous diversity, and this is something that we need to fight against. Okay. A summary of criticisms and outcomes. The methodological approach of the multinational team further exacerbates these issues. Their reliance on constructing a skull of Amenhotep III solely using third-party images to construct a 3D reconstruction without integrating the available anthropological data highlights a significant gap in their research process. The team also consisting of highly skilled individuals with a track record for employing notable and novel techniques in the field of facial approximation. So like I said, I will always give credit where it's due, but let me just scroll over. Clearly exhibit a lack of exposure to African phenotypic diversity. You can't be good at it all, okay? And this is exhibited in perhaps unintentional Eurocentric biases, such as the selective and inconsistent use of historical artwork and anthropological data. We already spoke about how he was being selective. Oh, he was fat, but he weren't brown, and he didn't have big lips, and he didn't have a big nose, but he was fat. Not good enough. That's pathetic, with all due respect, okay? The incorrect orientation and reconstruction of the skull of Amenhotep III, and we'll go into that. It's oriented and reconstructed incorrectly. The unjustified selection of pale skin for the subject, no justification given. Choice in total contradiction of actual depictions of the monarch, where we see his skin is consistently displayed as reddish brown. These methodological flaws not only distort the historical accuracy of the reconstruction, but also undermine the scientific credibility of the process. Now, this is my first kind of picture thingy, and I really love this one. I'll let you guys look at it for a second whilst I quickly give a thank you to Trill Black. By the way, guys, if you're not subscribed to Trill Black's channel, you are missing a trick. Fantastic channel. It says, even if the statues were symbolic, why in executing symbolism do they choose to make their king look black? It's hashtag white psychosis, gelatin. I'm not reading out all your hashtags. TKM on next. Okay, thank you, my brother. Really big compliment. By the way, please, like I said, check out his channel. It's very much on point. In fact, he's got one video where he's speaking about the fact that there's been a massive conspiracy, and I'm not sure if he touched on this in the video actually, because I joined him live, but I'm not sure if I stayed for the whole thing. But it was a massive conspiracy about the British Museum has been having a load of its inventory sold on private, on eBay, sold to the private market. And my gut feeling is that the British Museum is doing this deliberately to get rid of African artifacts in the age of the internet, when this stuff, when people go to the British Library and visit these kind of like private, these hidden collections, if they start taking images of these, it's almost like the smoking gun. And the reason I truly believe that this is the case is because when I did my video about Queen T, I did a video about Queen T. I think it's my latest one about Queen T. I did like several months back. But I found an artifact that I had never seen, and it was a genuine artifact. It had dates and everything. It was a genuine artifact. She had rich, dark brown skin, painted, and it was for sale on eBay. And I couldn't get I kind of ignored it. I shouldn't have ignored it, but it was for sale on eBay. But they had all of the hallmarks, all of the evidence to suggest this was an absolutely genuine piece, to the point where I was like, I can include this in my video. This is genuinely her. And it's only when he did his video that it actually clicked for me, and I was like, oh my goodness, they've been selling genuine ancient Egyptian artwork on eBay. It's shocking. But anyway, I won't spoil it all. Watch that live stream if you haven't done it, and respect for the donation, my brother. I appreciate you. Let me carry on. This image here, I love this image because, once again, in his latest paper, Mr. Moraes completely misunderstands Kemetic artwork, and the fact that one of the main reasons Amenhotep III's artwork looks different is because they depict him in different stages in life. They depict him from youth to adulthood. They depict him slightly slimmer, slightly wider. But if you look at the positioning of the features, it's always the same person. And this is why I was able to take my single reconstruction, which began here, and make slight adjustments in age downwards or in weight upwards without changing any of his features, and they looked exactly like corresponding statues. So as an African, I was able to look at this statue of him. I think this one's in the Louvre. Is it in the Louvre? I think it's in the Louvre. I think this one's in the Louvre. And when I saw that statue, I was like, oh, that's a little black boy. Straight away. There was no doubt. There was no straight away, because we all have cousins, nephews, or just little hoodlums in the area who look like this. And I was like, oh, that's a little black boy. So I knew he was young. Whereas a Eurocentric or kind of like Egyptologists will look at this and go, oh, why is this statue over? They'll see, they don't know if it's an adult or child or anything, because they just think, oh, it's just all symbolic artwork. It's like, no, you don't appreciate the artwork for what it is. Well, I say a great majority, 90+% of Amenhotep III's reconstructions can be easily placed alongside a reconstruction that kind of just like tallies his age and life. So if you could look at the reconstruction and kind of go, the statue, and kind of go, he kind of looks this age, I'm able to take my reconstructions, age them upwards or downwards, and not have to alter anything else, which is what I did in all these cases. So this was just a way of me displaying, hey, there's nothing untoward and there's nothing difficult that's going on with his several portraits. Okay, it's all the same person. It's all very, very consistent. Okay. Let's go and scroll, carry on. All right, now this paper aims to critique the multinational team's recent forensic facial reconstruction or facial approximation of Amenhotep III by addressing these critical issues by presenting comprehensive anthropometric, craniometric, genetic, cultural and artistic evidence. We will present a more anthropologically likely representation of the king's appearance. So once again, I'm not saying that ours is perfect, but I'm just saying that it's more anthropologically likely based on the evidence that combines 2D forensic projections. And by the way, I am getting to the stage where I'm actually going to classify my works as forensic works when I utilize the skull and when I utilize the cadaver, because actually my processes are 2D digital processes and they are every bit as considered and valuable as any other of these reconstruction artists. So they are forensic approaches. They might be utilize slightly different techniques, but I am very comfortable to classify when I use the cadaver or when I use the mummy them as 2D forensic projections with the available historical and anthropological data. Furthermore, we advocate for the inclusion of diverse African anthropological data sets and the participation of indigenous Africans and diaspora African researchers in future reconstruction efforts. So I mentioned that before. And then I just show this image here once again. The inclusion is essential for ensuring that, so I'm just going to scroll over, the rich phenotypic diversity of African populations is respected and accurately portrayed in future scientific reconstructions. So I just show here his reconstruction of the skull, which has errors, by the way. It's quite funny. Our skulls shouldn't be coming out that different. I know obviously we've got our reconstructions around the skull, but ignoring that, the shape of our skulls have come out different. And there's a reason why the shape of our skulls will come out different. I'm going to expose some of the skullduggery and cadavery that takes place in Mr. Moraes' reconstruction process. There are severe issues. I just want to say a big thank you to Stephen Carter. He says, thank you. This is so important. I wish I could help more. Well, you are helping massively with that $40 donation. I very much appreciate it. And to be honest with you, I do kind of want to sidetrack a little bit here. This paper that I've drafted, and I've said this because I've had a few people who joined my Patreon, and obviously I just had this donation from Stephen, obviously several today as well, but I'm just going to quickly say this. 3 to 4 weeks I've been producing a paper. This paper is not it's not content, it's not a video, it's just a paper. The only benefit it serves obviously is that it gives us as a community something to reference. Now, I'm not saying any of this to sing my fanfare. I want to actually just thank my contributors. The reason why is because I'm able to actually sit back and go, you know what, no new content on my channel for the next 3 weeks or whatever it is whilst I write this paper. And I can do that because I have generous people like you guys who are making these contributions and my patrons, and even those of you who tune in and don't. It's absolutely, I appreciate all of you. The point being, I am able to take some time back. I'm not getting funded, all of these researchers who produce these papers are funded. They're funded by universities, funded by X, Y, and Z. They get money for it. I'm writing this paper. I'm not funded at all, but you guys are my funders. So I just wanted to quickly say a massive thank you, because I appreciate it. When you come on these live streams, small donations, my Patreon, whatever it is, or even just watching it, giving me views, which hopefully down the line, which does translate to, money in the bank. It goes a long way because it allows me to say, okay, I can do more of this, which is what my intention is to do. I'd love to do more content, more papers like this that become referenceable for our community. So I just want to say a big thank you. A little bit of a sidetrack, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to pop that off the screen now and carry on. So this is where we kind of get into the meat and bones of it. So now we've got to go into that was all, believe it, that was all kind of like that was all just an intro basically for the real paper, which we've got to get into now. So the first part of the paper is an introduction to forensic facial reconstruction, and I really want you to kind of like come with me on this journey. We're not going to cover it in like full detail, but it will give you a nice overview of this entire industry and hopefully highlight some of the issues that it has. So let's start here. Whereas it's beyond the scope of this paper to undertake a detailed critique of the entire field of forensic facial reconstruction, and that is something that I'm working on at the moment. I'm going to do a larger one. It'll probably end up being a book in all honesty with you. It's important to establish the main contributing issues leading to the current limits in the capabilities of the practice and provide context to the critique of this particular reconstruction of Amenhotep III, which in itself will provide a lens to focus on broader issues that affect the field of forensic facial reconstruction, or FFR. A broader examination of the entire field of forensic facial reconstruction will be undertaken in the subsequent study. Forensic facial reconstruction is a technique used to recreate facial features of individuals from their skeletal remains, primarily isolated to the skull. This method is often employed in both forensic science, but increasingly finding relevance for its application in historical anthropology, providing visual representations of long deceased monarchs and the nobility of yesteryear. Importantly, the techniques vary greatly, particularly with the advent of modern digital workflows such as those employed by Mr Moraes. But they typically involve detailed anatomical knowledge and increasingly the utilization of database of sample populations in order to replicate trends and assess the efficacy of a reconstruction process. Regardless of whether manual construction methods or hybrid digital methodology is employed, such as Mr Moraes' method that utilizes a database of CT and ultrasound scans to form a digital exemplar. Now, I mentioned that earlier. So in Mr Moraes' process, he uses a purely digital process which relies on him first of all creating a 3D model of the skull, and then from the 3D model he utilizes basically tissue data, okay, that he's kind of got also from CT scans and stuff based on certain populations, obviously not African ones like I mentioned before, or if African ones, it'll be ones like, you know, Northern Egyptian, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But the point is, that's how his technique works. But there are other techniques, but they all require databases. So I do want that to be clear. I'm just going to highlight that word, database. Everything they do requires a database. The manipulation of vast database of contributing samples is required to formulate averages, because remember, these facial reconstructions are going to be based on average expressions around the expression of tissue data. Remember, we spoke earlier that soft tissue essentially is everything that is not the skeleton. This can be exercised in a layering form, which is the Russian method. So I don't know if you've seen those reconstructions where they kind of like layer them on, layer the muscles on, layer this. That's called the Russian method. Using tissue or using tissue data points in key areas of the skull. So the other method is the Manchester method, which we covered on this channel before, where they stick all these pins in and the pins have certain depths attached to them. So that's called the Manchester method. Or by the reproduction of a donor, or I've called it the exemplar method, which is then conformed to the skull. So that's Mr Moraes' method, where he'll basically do his 3D digital reconstruction and then he'll kind of stretch this template face over the top of it and conform it using different tissue depths. So it's kind of like a combination of digital and the Manchester method is how he kind of gets his one going. Now, he's got severe issues with his method, which I'm going to cover. And when I say severe, I would say very, very severe issues with his method, which we're going to cover in this video. Which is then conformed to the skull using algorithms that provide statistical analysis regarding average distances according to the proportions and projections, once again based on formulas that are based on databases of averages. So a database of averages. However, the reliability and objectivity of the resultant reconstructions has been a subject of ongoing debate, particularly when it comes to historical figures where ethnic and racial identities are sensitive and contentious. It's less cited, but equally the perspective amongst general public that influencing the ethnic perception of ancient civilizations can often be the driving factor for commissioning of these reconstruction projects. So I'm going to highlight that sentence because that's really key. A lot of the time, the only reason that they're doing these reconstruction projects is because they want to basically make a racial point. Okay, and this is actually proven. We're going to touch on it a little bit later, but Carolyn Wilkinson, who did the latest Ramesses just before Mr Moraes done his one literally the other day. She did one in 2023. He's done his one now in 2024. But his one's obviously a direct response to my one. He knows that and I know that. When she did her one, she actually said, you know, as one of her opening statements, oh, you know, it will stir up national pride. I'm like, well, that's not a reason for doing a reconstruction. Clearly, that's not scientific approach. Oh yeah, we're going to do a reconstruction, and the reconstruction is going to stir up national pride. Why should it? We both know why. We all know why it's going to stir up national pride, because you're going to make it look just like the people who are there now. That's not science. Okay, especially in the case of those sanctioned by Egyptian antiquity, who have who have a publicized history of belligerence towards researchers who dare to suggest the link between ancient civilization and the native black population. Ooh, oh my god, I've done it again. Sorry. One more. And the native black population. So I'm just actually going to go to I left a footnote here, but I want to kind of just read out what I've written in the footnote. I said here, in recent years, the Egyptian antiquity has become increasingly harsh towards any exploits by archaeological teams and anthropologists linking the ancient Egyptian civilization to the wider African population. This has been demonstrated by bans against archaeological teams and even lawsuits against media outlets, all focused against ancient Egyptians being black. So it has to be noted that Egypt has a history in racism. Okay, let's make that very, very clear. You can't go into this as a reconstruction artist and not know that the Egyptian antiquities or Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt is not racist. They are racist. Okay, they say ancient Egyptians were mixed, or ancient Egyptians were every color but not black. Okay, they are racist. There's no two ways about it. This racist gatekeeping in Egyptology is well known, highly publicized, but seldom challenged. And we experience that as black people. Okay, anything against black people is always given the green flag, and no one really cares. Let's be totally honest with you. But I've said here as a side note, it's important to note or to state at this point that there's no evidence to suggest the multinational team's approximation has been driven by financial incentives. To the contrary, Mr Moraes has expressed in private discourse that all of his work done thus far has been voluntary. So that's what he's shared with me, so I have to share that with you guys. Okay, now previous reconstructions of ancient Egyptian figures. This is where we get down to meat and bones. The portrayal of ancient Egyptian figures through forensic facial reconstruction remains controversial, but has been ceaselessly pursued by historians, anthropologists, and other interested parties. Sanctioned reconstructions have often been criticised for their lack of objectivity, with questions surrounding Eurocentrism and racial bias. This can be coupled with the known tendency to project present values of race and national identity onto an ancient people whose perspectives were not so binary. We're not binary as our own. I think I should say not so binary as our own in present day. There's a spelling error. And had no knowledge of race as a social construct. The tendency to illustrate ancient Egyptians as a Eurasian-leaning population has its roots in centuries of anti-African sentiment and outdated racial distinctions that have been present since the inception of Egyptology, forcing early Egyptologists to decide where in the rigid racial schema, and I've mentioned here Mongoloid versus Caucasoid versus Negroid, because when you think about it, this is clearly, people still do absolutely, think along these lines or these paradigms. Okay, am I dealing with a Caucasoid? Am I dealing with a Negroid? Or am I dealing with a Mongoloid? People still have these pseudo-scientific groups when they're classifying what people were. This ancient society belonged to. These same notions of race can be seen today in the field of reconstruction, where in spite of substantial anthropological data suggesting otherwise, Eurasian phenotypes, or Caucasoid phenotypes I could say, continue to be applied as default by the various teams carrying out the approximations. These decisions regarding race and phenotype are not being driven by anthropology. It's really important to state that. Now, double standards in the treatment of Egyptian portraiture. Ironically, Amenhotep III, prior to this recent attempt by the multinational team, is seldom approached as a subject for forensic facial reconstruction attempts. And I'm talking about by the mainstream. They leave him alone, and we know why that is. It is possible that in spite of him being a significant New Kingdom monarch, his portraiture is so overtly African that apart from a handful of attempts, he is for the most part considered to possess an overtly African phenotype. or among the fraternity of non-commissioned reconstruction artists like myself, there is at least the consensus that he is presented most commonly as a continental African man, even by Eurocentric artists. And this is true. You can go onto the net and there's loads of people who do similar things that I do in terms of reconstructions, and all of them are like, okay, Amenhotep III, I gotta do a black man. It's like, no one could look at his art. No one sane looks at Amenhotep III's art and goes, okay, yeah, that was a fat white man. They kind of go like, yeah, this, okay, look, I'll make all the other Egyptian pharaohs white, but this one was black. Clearly not Cicero. But yeah, there you go. Let me just give a quick shout out and a thank you. Black Rampage, who said scholar, salute. Thank you very much, my brother. I appreciate you so much, and thank you for that $10 donation. That's incredibly generous. And Truth Seeker, $50. Bow to your generosity. Said biased facial reconstructions of ancient Egyptians have gone largely unchallenged till now. Thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this paper is only part of the way I'm gonna go. I am going to come for forensic facial reconstructions. Like I said, in my next paper, it will be extensive. Like I said, and it might possibly end up being a book, but I am going to come for that field. I think the great thing about doing this channel and being obviously on here with you guys and having these discussions so often is that I have built up such a repository of knowledge in the area. It was only when I started putting it down that I realized how far we've come in the last year and a half, and I feel very, very confident to be able to challenge the bias that's in the field. So once again, thank you for your $50 donation. That is massive and I appreciate it. Thank you, Black Rampage. Really, really appreciate it. If you don't mind, like I said, I'm just going to disappear it from the screen once again so that people can follow along. Thank you very much, I appreciate it. Brunton's depiction of Amenhotep III. Now this is where I talk about the very first reconstruction artist, so we'll get to a bit of art history now. So ironically, there's a famous attempt to depict him by 19th century artist and Egyptologist South African Winifred Brunton, who was renowned for her talent, a bit of wry humour here, of transforming Egyptian monarchs into vaguely Hellenic dressing, Aryan looking Indo-Europeans. And when I say she had a talent for it, yeah, just want you to have a look at those. I want to see if you can guess who these are. Let me know if you can guess who these are. In fact, put some guesses, because I could scroll down further and tell you who these are, but I want you to put some guesses. Say like top left, or top left, middle, top right, middle, top right, bottom right. But I want you guys to actually put some guesses down as to who you think some of these monarchs are, please, because this is going to be hilarious. She is largely regarded as the first person to consider the living appearance of the kings and queens of Egypt through portraiture in the 1920s. So I want to see if you can guess who some of these cosplaying. And before I actually scroll down and carry on reading, what do you notice that these monarchs all have in common? Well, let's first of all note that they are not dressed like ancient Egyptians. Okay, why are they all wearing these white gowns? Okay, why are they all wearing these white gowns? Okay, ancient Egyptians were quite proudly bare-chested. Okay, almost all the time. I think there's like one or two depictions of pharaohs actually wearing gowns. The majority of them were bare-chested. Okay, we already know we got the wrong color, because none of these people are colored reddish brown. She didn't even paint the reddish brown tan on any of them. Bottom right, Nefertiti. Yeah, you got that right, because she made it look exactly like Nefertiti's statue. That's quite an easy one. That crown is the only one does it. I'm gonna see if anyone else got any. One is Ramesses on the top right. So you think this one top right, Ramesses? Cool. Any other bottom far? Okay, I'll try to see if there's any more. Everyone got Nefertiti. Most of you have no idea. Well, you shouldn't really have any idea, because she was literally on one. So Renaissance women said fat Greek people. I was like, yeah. Oh, they're certainly not the ancient Egyptians. But anyway, let's go through. So Winifred Brunton was at least consistent and transparent in her belief regarding the ethnic stock of the ancient Egyptians, but had a clear aversion to directly referencing the artwork beyond observation of the attire, which is only, like I said, partially regarded. She was also not influenced influenced by the forensic evidence. So she didn't do any forensic reconstruction, by the way. She just saw the art and thought, how can I whiteify this as much as possible? Yeah, she was very talented. She, in consistent form, I feel like I've made an error there. I said 19th century. She's 20th century artist, because I'm looking at the dates, her publishing dates. So you can see I did say this is first edition, guys. So there you go. I've got a few errors that I need to work through. She, in consistent form, depicted Amenhotep III as a clinically obese, very white Caucasian male. So here's her depiction of Amenhotep III, which I thought was really ironic when I saw it, because I was like, hey, that actually looks like Cicero's reconstruction. Okay, it doesn't look like the artwork. Neither of them look like the artwork, but they do look like each other. So he might take that and go, oh wow, look, she's approximated the same thing. The problem is she didn't use Amenhotep's skull like you did. You used the skull, she used the artwork. Hers looks nothing like the artwork, and I would argue yours is nothing like the skull. So what was the goal here, really? That's the question, isn't it? What were you both trying to get at? Ironically, in many ways, it was nearly identical to the one approximated by Moraes and team. However, she did so without the aid of forensic processes or any comparison to the skull. Miss Brunton's works have been openly described as enhanced illustrations of... Oh, I've just done it again. I always do that. Enhanced illustrations of existing statues, and in spite of being a keen Egyptologist who studied many mummies, it is agreed that she had scant evidence to base her paintings upon, employing none of the methodology utilized by modern reconstruction artists. Indeed, she did not adhere closely to the physical evidence that Mr. Moraes says is so important. In this case, how was she able to approximate this same face that they obtained from the skull? How did you get to the same overweight white dude with when you're using both completely different data that looks nothing like that? It's amazing, isn't it? Perhaps she was a psychic, or perhaps it doesn't take a forensic reconstruction artist to achieve the goal of Europeanizing a subject once the decision is made to ignore the subject's very African artwork. Seemingly any outcome can be achieved with a blank canvas approach. Okay, let's have a quick read of this little blurb I've written here. Brunton versus Moraes, the same outcome, equally divergent from the anthropological data. One used the skull, one did not, yet both ignored the anthropological data and ironically achieved the same outcome. Both approximated an overweight, pale-skinned Eurasian male, in total contrast to the anthropological data, pointing towards a native dark-skinned African man. Funny that, isn't it? I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Patrina. Thank you for becoming my first member. I've opened the YouTube membership thing. I'm not sure if it's a good idea or bad idea, but info penny, info pound, I'm gonna have to definitely support it now that I've got my first member join. Patrina, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So it's there. I'm not gonna do a big plug here because I've got a lot to do, but I really appreciate you joining there, Patrina. Elizabeth Darnes, you'll be familiar with her work. She's the one who's responsible for the Agamo Nefertiti, who I've already done, I think, a short and maybe even a video destroying. But Elizabeth Darnes, famous paleo artist Elizabeth Darnes, who is renowned for her work in the field of archaeological forensic facial reconstruction, did not reference any of Tutankhamun's hundreds of consistent portraits for her facial reconstruction, both the commissioners and artists seemingly agreeing that the busts were of no value in the reconstruction of the king. Yet, and this is key, so bear in mind, she's done reconstruction of Tutankhamun. Don't show me any busts, we just want the skull. Don't show me the mannequin, don't show me the golden throne. The skull is all we need, and I will make his face. Conversely, when the same artist, so Elizabeth Darnes, created a facial reconstruction based on the remains of KV-35 younger lady as Nefertiti, which she isn't, but anyway, a work that is held in high regard by the multinational team, every effort was made to reference the single and controversial Berlin bust. So when she had KV-35 younger lady, which by the way is not Nefertiti, but when she decided, or when the Egyptian antiquity decided, we want you to turn that into Nefertiti, she used Nefertiti's bust solely when she made that reconstruction. So there's a clear contradiction going on there. The reconstruction team headed by Darnez painstakingly sought to match its likeness as much as craniometrically possible, which wasn't very much since they were entirely incompatible. In short, the skull had substantial zygomatic projection, I've spoke about this already, a rounded forehead, pronounced dolichocephaly, an extended alveolar, and strong prognathism, all of which are typical of Nilotic Africans, and all of which were not present or devoid on the Berlin bust. So you have total incompatibility here. And yet, she felt the need that she had to make this. This raises the question as to why the Berlin bust was regarded as a reliable depiction over her several alternative and more phenotypically consistent busts and reliefs. Because remember, we have dozens of portraits of Nefertiti, not just the Berlin bust. The Berlin bust is the outlier. It's the one that looks different. And why the Berlin bust was suitable as an anthropological aid in the reconstruction process, in this case, yet none of the hundreds, I repeat, hundreds of busts of Tutankhamun were suitable. Why were none of the hundreds of busts of Tutankhamun suitable as an aid in the reconstruction when the same reconstruction artist undertook the work, that work under a similar commissioning body? Okay, so we have in here two completely different approaches. In this case, Tutankhamun's skull, I don't care about the artwork because the artwork's a young black boy. In this case, KV35 younger lady's skull, totally incompatible, but it must look like Nefertiti as much as possible. Skin tone, eye color, we'll mold the lips as much as we can, even though they end up looking like collagen lips. Doesn't look anything like her, but it must look the same. Can you see the contradiction here? Left, KV35 young lady modelled after Nefertiti by Elizabeth Darnez. Right, when the same reconstruction artist developed the reconstruction of King Tut, none of the features or skin tone or any of the artworks were used. Could the reason be that the busts of Tutankhamun, which unanimously portray his full lips, round-tipped nose, deep brown skin and full face, all consistently fall in line with the surrounding native African population? I think we know the answer to that. But the Berlin bust is objectively more Eurasian in appearance and therefore accepted. Yes, that is obviously a rhetorical question. I think we all know the answer to that. I just want a quick shout out. Thank you, Chirox. So thanks for this channel. I'd also love to see you go over some Kushite and maybe Aksumite reconstructions. They claim a Eurasian for them too. We will certainly get there. We will certainly get there. And I think that's a really good point. What I think is quite important, just on that note, is that this is one of the reasons why, you've got me on a bit of a tangent here, but I will actually mention this. One of the reasons why I do stay quite heavily on ancient Egypt as a battlefield, and actually from ancient Egypt I'm probably more likely to move into Europe and black history in Europe, is because one thing I've noticed about Eurocentrics is that they are very much in the business of, you give them an inch, they take a mile. So the moment we kind of like take a step back and that, you know, and go, okay, I'm just going to talk about, like, I'll give you an example. I did a short recently on the Great Wall of Benin. I don't know if any of you guys have checked that out, but I did a short recently on the Great Wall of Benin. Now you'd think they'd be celebrating, oh, thank God he's not talking about Egypt anymore. Yeah, he's talking about, yeah, that's it, talk about what. Nope, that's not the approach. It's suddenly now, oh, this is a lie. There was no wall in Benin, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. Oh, yeah. So the moment you move, all that's going to happen is they're going to move their aggression to whatever you move to. I've mentioned before, there's this channel on TikTok who used to criticize my channel, other channels, calling us Hoteps. Oh, those Hoteps, oh yeah, oh, be proud of your West African history. And he's a black guy. I actually thought it was a white guy, person's black. What's a black guy? Black West African. And he, you know, I don't know where he's from. I haven't talked to him that much. But the funny thing is, he was on this whole thing of calling anyone who was talking about ancient Egypt or stuff like Hoteps and this, that, and the other, being really insulting. I went to his page recently because he used to have some really good content, and his page is just literally overrun with trolls claiming the kingdom of Mali was established by Arabs. So it's not like they've just gone on there and gone like, oh, this is such a great page. You're not like the king's monologue. You're not like the king's monologue and his obsession with ancient Egypt. You're just doing true African history. They're like, no, that's ours too. We'll take Mali as well. We'll take Timbuktu, and then we'll take Benin. So wherever we move to, they'll try and take it. Don't get it twisted. This is the way they work. Okay, so there's no point in you conceding history, and I'm not saying that you're saying this to us, by the way, but there's no point in us conceding history, which we know belongs to Africa, in the hope that they're going to, you know, go, oh, okay, yeah, finally, yeah, we'll be at peace now. It's like, no, they don't want Africans to have anything. You must be clear of that. They claim the walls in Great Zimbabwe were built by white people. That claim's been done, made. Okay? They will distort African history. So this is why I do not relinquish anything. I'm like, cool, I will talk about those other things, but I'll do that when I'm done talking about Egypt. And when I'm done talking about Egypt, I'm probably going to go into Europe. Okay? This is a battle of offense for me. It's not a battle of defense. I'm not retreating for anybody. I just want to make that clear to everyone who's on this channel. Okay? They'll just have to put up with me. Let me move on. Reconstructions of Tutankhamun through the ages. This is quite an important point to touch on. On the subject of King Tutankhamun, there have been a plethora of forensic reconstruction attempts, some of which I have depicted for brevity, and we'll come on to that image that I've shown. Approximately 8 have been published, and together they illustrate the substantial divergence in the interpretation of the king's features. Interestingly, all of these reconstructions have been presented to the public as forensic. So this is the word they like to use, and Mr Moraes uses a lot. Your reconstructions are not forensic. Okay, but yours are, and yet none of yours look the same. So tell me what's scientific about that if you're all using forensic approaches and coming up with different faces. And all teams responsible have been equally dismissive in the valuation of his portraiture as a contributor. So the one thing they do have in common is they refuse to use his portraits. They all go, we just need the skull, because obviously they don't want his black portraits, suggesting the skull provides all the data required for an accurate reconstruction. However, it's clear after numerous attempts that we are no closer to achieving forensic consensus. They have all interpreted the same data entirely differently. This debunks the claim that the process is capable of producing an objective, consistent outcome. So even though they've all agreed this is a young Arab boy, they can't even agree on what that young Arab boy looks like. And yet they tell you that this is a science. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's like, wait a second, you're all forensic artists, you've all got the same skull, and you're all using an Egyptian data set, a modern Egyptian data set for your tissue data, and you still can't come to consensus about what this guy looked like. This is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. This debunks the claim that the process is capable of producing an objective, consistent outcome. Surely each reconstruction team would have benefited from finding a way to utilize the portraits even as a rudimentary guide. Thus, above all else, would have at least this above all else would have at very least produced a more consistent result centered around reliable source material. That is, unless his true face wasn't the result they were actually after. And this is where you get an opportunity to look at these, I'm not going to say monstrosities, but they don't exactly look human, do they? 6 of the 8 reconstructions here. This one reminds me of Handsome Squidward. If you know about Handsome Squidward, give me a shout out. Tell me this one doesn't look like Handsome Squidward. Come on, man. This one is Gatliff's reproduction that looks exactly like her. Okay, this one just looks like an I mean, come on. Anyway, this is Mr Cicero Moraes' one, which he did after my one, and you noticed he thought he's hilarious actually, because he recently was like, I remember when he did his reconstruction, I was like, they're using the artwork and they've seen my reconstructions and they know my reconstructions are getting more attention and credibility, so they're now trying to push theirs along so they match the artwork. So he produced this one last year, like I said, about a year ago, and I knew instantly that he'd be using the artwork, because the nose is almost a dead ringer match for the artwork nose and for my nose, and there's no way he just got there using his standard methodology. The only thing is he didn't want to make the lips as thick as they needed to be, because the moment you made those lips a bit thicker with that nose, this is just a light-skinned black man, And I believe he probably tried the thick lips and then got rid of them because, I mean, anyway, you can look at this, you can see exactly what I'm getting at with that. The funny thing is, in his latest paper, he's started comparing his works to the artwork, and he was like, oh, actually, it's amazing because when this was overlaid to the artwork, it's an exact match. So he's kind of trying to use it as a tool to justify his work, as though it just, his portrait, so his reconstruction just happened to have this nose, like he didn't copy the artwork. It's like, mate, give over, I'm not stupid. He definitely used the artwork when he was making that nose, because it's very divergent from any nose he's ever created. So it's clear that what he was doing when he made this reconstruction. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that up there. But look, 6 completely different faces. Let me quickly say a quick thank you. Zehovan, thank you. Psychopathic racism is what you call it. They need to constantly be in black spaces and show like they have nothing better to do. And I know you're talking specifically about what I was talking about earlier, and it's true. Like I said, they don't let up. So this is why I don't let up. We have to stand on our ground and not try and compromise, because there's no area to compromise on. You compromise where you think the truth lies. Wherever you think the truth lies, fix your feet firmly in that position and don't compromise it for anyone. Because when you relinquish, it's just seen as a sign of weakness, which they will then come for. I'm telling you that for free. Macy said, thank you very much for that donation. Macy said, we cannot concede any of our history because all of it is under assault and theft. Absolutely. Absolutely. There needs to be absolutely zero concession in terms of the way we deal. Let me read on. So, from the top left, we have Selim, 2014, Gatlif, 1983. This is the Gatlif reconstruction. Corbett, 2022. I haven't seen anyone say, Hampson Squidward. Am I the only one who thinks that? I thought more people would have known that. Anyway, Moraes 2023 over here, Lunau 2016, and Darnes, or Elizabeth Darnes 2005. Forensic facial reconstruction all present different approximations of how Tut's features should be interpreted. In the case of Moraes and all attempts, so this one over here, the head shape has changed considerably. We'll talk about that actually, because he does the skulls incorrectly, like I mentioned before. All artists would argue foremost science has objective outcomes, yet we have divergent nose and mouth widths, shapes and projections. Only the position of the eyes and the unsupported certainty that he is of Middle Eastern as opposed to native African racial stock, the latter consensus being reached with no supporting anthropological reasoning in any of the reconstructions. Yeah, so did you note that? So they all agree he's Middle Eastern. That's the only thing they have in common. Apart from that, they look completely different. Now we're going to move on to Carolyn Wilkinson. First of all, a quick shout out as well. Thank you, Abdi, for joining my members as well. I really appreciate that, guys. Thank you very much. So, renowned historical reconstruction artist. In fact, let me just quickly give you a little screen time. Yeah. Renowned historical reconstruction artist, anthropologist, and head of Face Lab Carolyn Wilkinson, in her reconstruction of Ramesses II, continued the Egyptological trope of totally ignoring multiple consistent statues of Ramesses II, many of which depict an identical face and all exhibiting traits unique and consistent to the king. Now, those of you who have been on my channel for a while, you know I've covered Carolyn Wilkinson a couple of times. In fact, she was probably my first reconstruction artist, and I learned a lot from her lectures actually. So you know that I'm always quite, even though I don't like what she does, I'm always quite complimentary of her. I don't know what it is. Maybe she reminds me of a good teacher growing up or something like that. I will say this, her latest reconstruction of Ramesses, the paper that she produced that went with that, really rubbed me up the wrong way. So she's come down a lot because she's doing a lot of this not blackism. Remember, I keep speaking about this not blackism, where they're not proving that the race is anything else. They're only saying that they're not black. And I really hate that. That's the thing. Like I said, all they can do is raise polemic arguments against the blackness, but they can't create any arguments for their choice of olive skin. They know it's not supported, and I find that really frustrated. Even she notes the fact that Ramesses most common color depiction is red brown. She says red brown, red brown, red brown, red brown, and then she creates a reconstruction which you can see here on the right. It's clearly yellow, olive. You know, that's not red brown. That's wheat colored, like they like to say. You know, it's not red brown, and it's quite a frustrating thing to deal with, to be honest with you. So yeah, she's come down a bit in my estimations, I have to say. Quick shout out to Grenshaw Grinder. Thank you for the $20. He said we cannot give them an inch because we have lost too much already. 100% agree. I would love to see Sumerian reconstructions. That would be interesting. But do the Sumerians possess anything close to the level of artwork of the ancient Egyptians? I have to look into that. Maybe they do. I'm not an Assyriologist, so I've got some work to do in that area. But thank you for your very generous $20 donation and for your recommendation. Now I'll have a look into that. Let me carry on. The irony being she was happy to selectively consider aspects of anthropology and the artwork she felt confident to produce the outcome that would, in her own words, and pay attention here guys, stimulate a sense of national pride. Depictions of the pharaohs can be important tools in this effort. Yes, she said that. And by the way, she restated this as well. So I said, obviously, this is worrying sentiment to express in a field of objective study, where the outcomes should be determined by the process and not the agenda. This is a massive problem. She noted the prominent use of reddish-brown skin tone in Egyptian art and went on to produce a notably beige, non-reddish-brown colour approximation. She painstakingly identified the differences between Nubians and Egyptians. Remember I said earlier, not blackism. So she painfully pointed those out. Oddly, mentioning the claim Nubians are depicted with curly hair, which is just not true, yet Egyptians are the only ones ever depicted with perfect afros. And I've said one can observe the Nama palette, Appendix 8, for evidence. Okay, so we've all seen the Nama palette. All right, that's evidence. The Egyptians depicted themselves with perfectly round afros on several occasions. Nubians were not depicted with these perfectly round afros. They normally had their hair in the Kemetic short twist, or the African short twist, because everyone in Africa seemed to have that same short twisted hairstyle. God only knows why we don't use that hairstyle to this day. But yes, so she's even making stuff up. Oh, you know, the Nubians are depicted with curly hair. What are you talking about? Egyptians are never depicted with straight hair. So what on earth are you really talking rubbish, all due respect, as much as, you know. In fact, I just want to, I'm not going to put up the Nama palette. If you want to, just Google the Nama palette and you will see the ancient Egyptians depicted with afros. That's just one example of several, by the way. The only one I could think of that I just kind of threw on in the appendix. Contrasting with the straight hair of the invading class. Notice I mentioned the invading class, never the ancient Egyptians. They're always depicted with African hairstyles, i.e. curly hair. So yeah, that really irritated me. She was just talking absolute rubbish. I just want to say a quick shout out. Thank you very much for the 100 South African Rand from you backhand. He said, keep up the awesome work, TKM. Thank you. I will very much try. No distinction is made between Egyptians and Nubians. She even cited genetic evidence from the Schunemann study. So by the way, she cited the Schunemann study, which we've debunked on this channel a number of times, supporting of her racial choices, seemingly unaware of the multiple shortcomings of this, notwithstanding its very limited sampling of formerly held tombs which were used in time periods outside of dynastic era of Egypt. In short, the entire exercise seemed to apply only the aspects of anthropology that would suit the outcome of producing a reconstruction that would stimulate national pride. Once again, those are her words. And by national, we mean those in a position of political influence as opposed to those actual reddish brown Egyptian nationals of Aswan. I thought I'd just throw that out there as well. Because if you want to stimulate national pride and you want it to look like a modern Egyptian, there are plenty of reddish brown modern Egyptians you could have sampled and gotten much closer, but you didn't even do that. Or the south of Egypt. The study will prove in some detail that Ramesses, who has several striking bas-reliefs and statues showing a prominent and recognizable profile, has enough supporting anthropological evidence to have been able to produce a much more honest approximation. Miss Wilkinson, who utilises Manchester method for her reconstructions, oddly opted against utilising the detailed and numerous portraits of Ramesses II. The decision to ignore these is questionable, since it's the same artist who stated regarding her process, and once again these are her words: "The greatest accuracy is possible when information is available from preserved soft tissue, from a portrait, which I have highlighted or made bold, or from a pathological condition or healed injury." But she knows that basically when you have data from a portrait, it makes your final reconstruction better. And she knows this because she's utilised portraits before, which we'll come on to in a second. Here, Miss Wilkinson clearly states how important physical contemporary portrayals of individuals are to the positive outcomes of a forensic reconstruction. So I've just left a note here under this image. You can see her reconstruction is here of Ramesses. Here's the statue of Ramesses. They are divergent, they do not look the same, and that's because she hasn't used them. Quick shout out, thank you to Angel Venus for your very generous $20 donation. Thank you very much. No comment, but I appreciate you. However, on this occasion she opted instead to again conduct an isolated reconstruction based on just the anatomy of the skull and the selected tropes regarding skin tone, which she subsequently ignored. Okay, so she mentioned, okay, reddish brown, but then ignored it. This is surprising, since I want you to pay attention now, watch the contradiction in the process. When the same reconstruction artist conducted reconstructions of composer J.S. Bach and English monarch King Richard III, single portraits were not only sufficient, but were referenced significantly in the selection of complexion and features. In the case of the latter, so that's King Richard III, the portrait that was not even contemporaneous to his life but produced around 65 years after his death. So this portrait was made after he died. I actually had it down to 100, but my the PhD who I got to mark my paper for me, or I asked to mark my paper and he very generously agreed to, is I think he's a history major, and I think in British history, and he said it wasn't 100 years or 65 years. So I'll have to double check those dates, but I thought it was about 100 years after his death. But anyway, he said 65 years after his death, still influenced the reconstruction artist and team to try their very best to match its appearance, fully adhering to match its appearance irrespective of how incompatible the skull was with the clearly phenotypically divergent features of the painting. So what I'm getting at here is basically they had a skull. In my opinion, the skull presented none of the features of the painting, but she had no choice and made it very clear her agenda was to make her reconstruction match the painting. That was the goal she was given. That was the job she was given, and that's what she did. Okay, so there's clearly a completely different approach that's being taken here. It's amazing that even in the case where it is known that the artwork was not a portrait but representative, because it was made 100 years after he died, so it's not a portrait, okay, it was something that was done from reference information. Bear in mind, we don't have photographs back in those days. Where's this data come from? Did they grab his son? Who knows? Okay, it was still given primacy, yet the artworks that we know were contemporaneous with Ramesses, i.e. Ramesses II, were regarded as useless. So I want you to think about the pathology behind that. Ramesses' several portraits produced during his lifetime, these aren't good enough, we're not interested, put these aside, these are standardized, blah 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 blah. Richard III, after he's died, 100 years after he's died, skull doesn't match, make it match. It's rather telling that in her 2023 paper, the reconstruction artist states as the opening highlight, depicting the face of such an important ancient Egyptian pharaoh stimulates national pride and cultural knowledge transfer. Why would revealing the face stimulate national pride if the exercise had not been undertaken to resemble the modern population, or at least the part of the population regarded as symbolically representing the nation? This kind of open agenda is revealing and troubling. And so over here, I'm just giving you a bit of a visual clue to what I was saying. So here's the portrait of Richard III made a century after he died. Here's the reconstruction. Here's the portrait of J.S. Bach, and here's the reconstruction. Now, most of you will be looking at that and be going, oh, well, they kind of match. Now, bear with me, because I'm going to explain some things here as to why I don't believe there's a match at all. And some of you will be able to see some of these things already. In the reconstruction of Richard III left and J.S. Bach right, the portraits were held in such high regard that in both cases, visible orthagnatism, okay, so that's the, basically when your face comes straight down, your orthagnathus or orthognathus, when your face goes straight down, and slight jaw lines from the portrait. So you can see here they both have that. So they're both visibly orthagnathus, where their face goes straight down from basically from, you know, it basically goes straight down, doesn't come forward at all. You have that in both of the portraits, and they have very slight jaw lines. You can see here, small jaw lines, very nimble chins, okay? In the portraits were exchanged for visibly broad jawline and substantial mandibular prognathism. Now, prognathism we already know is when your jawline sticks forward, and you can see, particularly in King Richard III, he has substantial, that's not a little bit, his jaw be sticking out like Prince Farquhar, okay? His jaw is sticking out massively. And it's the same thing here. Look at the size of Bach's jaw, okay? This isn't a minor difference. This is a substantial difference. The noses also protruded more, and the teeth did not align with the mouth. This was particularly in King Richard III's one, okay? The mouth is up here, the teeth are down here, okay, on the actual skull. So the teeth are actually much lower than the mouth in the actual skull. The mouth was artificially moved up to reduce the large maxillary. So the maxillary, or the alveolar region, is that top lip region. So on the actual skull, the maxillary is large, but you wouldn't guess that because they've just decided to change that when it came to his portrait. When it came to his reconstruction. However, the portraits continued to be adhered to with reverence throughout the process in spite of these glaring incompatibilities. And that's what I'm going to call them. They're incompatibilities. These aren't kind of like, oh, slight difference. No, these are different. There's something going on here where these portraits are not of the people of these skulls that you've chosen. All right, but it doesn't matter, because this is Eurocentrism we're talking about. And if we say it's a match, it's a match. Glaring incompatibilities that should cause one to question the authenticity of either the remains or the portraiture itself. Okay, so I've made that very, very clear. Indeed, the trend in the case of forensic facial reconstruction is clear. Historic artwork and portraiture is valuable, but not when the artwork is of an, I'm going to say here, overtly African phenotype. The rules of when and when not to utilize supporting artwork is not even consistent. Treatment. 1 second. The rules of when and when not to utilize supporting artwork is not even, I should say consistently, is not even consistent treatment within the narrow field of Egyptology. So that's a bad sentence. We know this since when the portrait exhibits traits which could be considered Caucasoid, such as the Aryan adored bust of Nefertiti, which you mentioned earlier, the trope regarding Egyptian artwork being incompatible and standardized as opposed to accurate portraiture is suddenly discarded. So when it's Nefertiti they're dealing with, oh, this is a beautiful, wonderful piece of artwork, and this is what Nefertiti looked like. But as soon as you got Nefertiti looking like an African, oh yeah, it's just standardized, standardized incompatible artwork, and the art inexplicably reverts to being realistic and reliable portraiture once again. An interesting double standard indeed. Okay, yes, please, I will say to everyone, hit up the likes. 250 of us online, we're doing quite well. How long will we be going for? We're going for nearly 2 hours. That is long. I don't think we're going to finish this paper, but I look forward to doing a part 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up to the point where we get to the methodological flaws, because I really want to have some time for us to go through that together as a community. So I'm going to carry on, and I don't know, I'm not sure how long it will take. It'll probably take about another half an hour to get through the paper to get to the part of the methodological flaws, and that I think we'll part 2 that. Okay, But yeah, thank you guys. This has been a really enjoyable stream so far. Please stay tuned, and we're going to carry on for a bit. Quick shout out to, make sure I haven't missed any here. Later Lafraise. I'm not sure how I'm saying your name, I'm probably butchering it, sorry. Thank you very much for your €5 donation. Thank you for what you're doing, watching from France. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. Thank you very, very much. Your donation is very much appreciated. And a quick shout out and a thank you to Talia. Said, studies and papers such as this are very important. Please continue the great professional work to reveal the true history. I will. And I will add that I actually genuinely enjoyed writing this paper, as difficult as it was. And I say is because it's not completed yet. As you can see, I've got a few errors still to work through. It was a very enjoyable process. So thank you. Your contribution is very much appreciated, Talia, and your ongoing support, which is much appreciated. I do notice it. Anthropological data on Amenhotep III that contributes to estimating his ethnicity. Anthropological data, including anthropometric data, genetic studies, cultural artifacts, provide crucial insights into the appearance and possible ethnicity of ancient Egyptians. There is substantial evidence to suggest that ancient Egyptians exhibited a diverse range of phenotypes native to the Nile Valley region, and in support of the historical legacy, eyewitness accounts, and all literature and art predating the 18th century, these phenotypes were typically African. So let me make that very, very clear. These were typically African phenotypes. Anthropometric evidence. Studies have shown that the anthropometric proportions of ancient Egyptians of New Kingdom pharaonic lineage are entirely consistent with the bodies of modern Central African populations. In numerous studies conducted on ancient Egyptian mummies, both male and female, extending across the pharaonic lineage of the New Kingdom, the limb proportions were processed through formulae calculated to navigate the distinct differences observed in distal segments when compared to proximal segments for black subjects in comparison to white subjects. Now, I didn't use the terms black and white. I'm quoting. You'll see those are being quotes from the paper. Okay, so I have to make that very clear. When we're using kind of like terminology that maybe does or doesn't have value, this would be, I would say, somewhat outdated. It's from two studies, by Robbins. Now, just to make a quick explanation, your distal segments are the parts of the bones that are furthest away from the center of your body. So that would be things like your tibia, that bone beneath the elbow. I can't remember what it's called. Forearm. I'm not sure exactly what the name of the bone is, but those bones. And Africans, by and large, have longer distal segments. Okay, and shorter torso, and sometimes shorter proximal segments. But sometimes the proximal segments are the same. But normally it's exhibited in the torso and distal segments. Whereas when it comes to white, if we're going to use the language on this paper, white subjects, they'll have shorter distal segments and longer torsos. Okay, so that's just kind of giving a bit of a nutshell so you know how that works. I've actually done quite a bit of work in that area of anthropometrics, and I think I've got a couple of videos, if not on this channel. I've got another channel called The King Mono Show, which you can search for, where I've got a video that discusses kind of like anthropometric proportions, and it's a tool to be used alongside other tools of anthropology. I actually think it's quite conclusive, to be totally honest with you, because it's very rare. I would say it's very rare that you get white people with black body proportions or black people with white body proportions. That's probably one of the areas where there is a little bit of a gap. I'm not one of these people who kind of like argue for phrenology, but it is one of those things, kind of like, there's the, skinny leg black guy trope. It does come from somewhere. All right. There's the, the thin East African trope. There are kind of like, ethnic clues, to certain ethnic groups. Okay. Little things that play themselves out in terms of the way the body expresses itself. We don't all have the same body, I could go on. I'm not going to go on, but you guys know, you've probably observed these differences. The initial, and I've actually mentioned that here, the initial reaction to these kind of studies will raise questions regarding ethics, regarding race, because of the eerie association with things like phrenology. However, there are distinct differences between the tropical evolved populations of Africa versus the cold adapted populations of Eurasia. And notice I said tropically evolved as opposed to adapted, because once again, I think the African body plan should be the default. These differences aren't reflected as consistently in facial features and complexions, features to which we normally esteem great value to. So when it comes to our face, because that's like straight, kind of like it's in your face, so it is, you know, literally speaking, no pun intended, people notice facial features straight away. That's kind of, but facial features actually aren't that good an indicator, okay? Particularly when you got, once again, Africans who have those Eurasian overlaps, whereas body proportions is normally a much better and a much more consistent differentiator between populations. Africans exhibit comparatively much longer distal segments in comparison to proximal segments, and proportionately shorter torsos and broader shoulders. Okay, we probably would have observed this. Look at the ancient Egyptians and their very square shoulders. Okay, square shoulders is such an African trait. It's such an African trait. It's not, particularly in women. You'll notice that the ancient Egyptian women have square shoulders. Only African women have square shoulders. I will go out on a limb and say that. Only African women have square shoulders. That's just a thing, okay? African women often have very square, very flat shoulders. It is a thing, okay? And it's something that we know about the African female body proportions. In fact, it does remind me, there's actually a really good, I say good in inverted commas, reconstruction of Menkaure, okay? And it's done by a kind of like one of these Egyptian nationalist kind of people, and they've taken Menkaure and they've made him look like a local Arab. And conversely to a lot of reconstructions that are done, this one actually looks quite good, where you kind of go, I can kind of see where you've gone there, changing his features to an Arab. The problem is they've done a full body one, and if you look at the body, it just doesn't match. It's kind of like, no disrespect, that's a black person's body. I've never seen those limb proportions. So if you look at the limb proportions of Menkaure when he's standing with his wife in that kind of triad, that's a black man's body. You can't just, you know, it only those limb proportions only work for a black person, okay? It's just the way it is. There are differences in body proportions. He has square, large, flat shoulders, long arms that droop all the way quite close to his knees. I mean, that's just very, very black proportions, okay? So it's just one of those things. People don't like talking about these things, but it is just the reality, you know. So distinct it is different. It can be observed. The difference, it can be observed in sport, where East African distance runners are renowned for their long, narrow limbs. Additionally, in boxing, it's almost a trope that fighters of African descent will be afforded a reach advantage over non-African fighters when they are of comparative height. That's just the thing, okay? I'm into boxing, so it's probably why I use this as a reference. It's always the case. If you've got two fighters, both are 5'9", the black guy will normally have a 2 to 3 inch reach advantage over the white guy. It's just the thing. That's not racism. It's just something we know. The commentators know. No one will go, oh yeah, he's got black reach, but it's kind of just known, okay? Importantly, the ancient Egyptians consistently cluster with tropical evolved Africans, with researchers able to effectively calculate their limb lengths using Negro equations. And this, once again, is language from the paper, not my language. These limb proportions have otherwise been described as supernegroid by researchers, and these proportions, these proportional differences are consistent across male and female subjects. So they wouldn't come up with these things like Negro proportions or black proportions if it wasn't a thing. They wouldn't call it. They wouldn't. I mean, Robbins is a Eurocentric, so I'll make that very, very clear. And even he is very, very torn when he creates these papers, because he's like, well, they definitely weren't black, but on the other note, we can only calculate their body proportions if we use the Negro equations. But they weren't black. It's like, okay, dude, why did you call them Negro proportions? No one asked you to do that, but there you go, that's what it is. It's important to note that Amenhotep III was among the pharaohs sampled by Robbins, and this is why I mentioned this study, titled The Physical Proportions and Living Stature of New Kingdom Pharaohs. The body plan of Amenhotep III fell perfectly in line with the Negro equation, corresponding with the tibio-femoral ratio. So that's your kind of the ratio between your femur and your tibia, that equated substantially amongst black African limb proportions. So basically they were only able to take the bone of any ancient Egyptian and calculate their height, but only using Negro equations, and they would get the correct height. When they tried to do that with the white equations, that's the language once again that they've used, it didn't work. Okay, it would give them lots of different heights depending on the bones, because the proportions of bones in Eurasian people just didn't suit the study. And so I've just given a little screenshot here. You can see the numbers here, but this is Amenhotep III. You can see he's literally sitting right on that line for black Africans. Okay. I'm not going to read all of that because I've kind of explained it. These studies effectively prove that irrespective of any other data we might be confronted with, Amenhotep III, along with several other New Kingdom pharaohs, had the body of a native African. On a physiognomic perspective, he would not look out of place amongst the long-limbed Maasai, Tutsi or Nilotes of the Nile Valley. These body plans are really very much a signature of African populations, and in stark contrast to modern Near Eastern and Eurasian populations, sporting shorter distal segments in comparison to the proximal. Amenhotep III's tibia-femoral ratio, falling central to the black negroid line of best fit, signifies researchers were able to perfectly calculate his height and length of any of his bones using a single bone quite conclusively and with very little error. The study states it is shown that the limbs of the pharaohs, like those of ancient Egyptians, had Negro characteristics in that the distal segments were relatively long in comparison with the proximal segments. Okay. Another study was conducted to ascertain. Now this one is very, very important. All right. This study should really just be the nail in the coffin. Okay. Because it's almost like when you present a study like this and then you get the result and then people still argue with you, it's kind of like, you're not in for truth, are you? Okay, you're not here to have an honest discussion. Let's go in. Another study was conducted to ascertain the best method of rehydrating mummified soft tissues. Conducted melanin density observations as part of the research process. McCode 2005. The authors discovered that the skin of the mummies had melanin concentration that fell in line with Negroid populations. Now that's really a mic drop moment. Okay, she's there studying the dermis and epidermis of ancient Egyptian mummies, thinking about the best way to rehydrate them so that they can run certain studies and do certain things with them. Okay, as part of her observation, she discovers, based on their melanin density, not based on observation or based on bitumen or based on tar or based on anything else, based on melanin density, these people have got black skin like Negroids. Those are exact words. Suggesting that the ancient Egyptians in this study were dark-skinned, deeply melanated Africans. As informative as this revelation was, what makes this research particularly relevant to this paper is that I said 297, it was 273. Sorry, that's another error I gotta sort out. Don't go head top. There's a bit of error in there. Mummies were sampled for the research were from Thebes. Okay, now why is that relevant? Okay, we know that the 18th dynasty was a Theban dynasty, the very district that the illustrious 18th dynasty monarchy hailed from. Given that these Negroid mummies were also nobles, okay, so these were people of royal status who likely would have ended up being in the monarchy, far from being unidentified persons like in future studies that have given so much unwarranted credence. So think of this. I want you to do a quick comparison because this is really, really important. You've got Carolyn Wilkerson and several other people who love to quote the Schunemann study. Schunemann study, who we know they sampled 151 mummies, but they only got full autosomal DNA from 3 mummies. 3. The rest were just Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA lineages, which don't really tell us anything. Okay, there are 3 mummies where they get full autosomal DNA. Of those 3 mummies, they don't know the names of any. They don't know where they're from. They don't know who they were related to. We don't know if they're royal. We don't know if they're foreign. I mean, we do know that they're foreign, but let's pretend we don't know. We just don't know anything about them. There's 3 mummies. And those 3 mummies happen to have similar DNA to Near Easterners, Europeans. And they were like, conclusive. Those 3, the autosomal DNA we got from those mummies doesn't tell us anything about their race, by the way. Because they could have similar DNA to those people and still not, be any race, essentially. They could be black, white, anything in between. We have no idea what they are. But yet that's enough for them to assert the race of the entire nation of Egypt, where she's used that to argue. And bear in mind that the oldest mummy I think they had in that was late period, okay? That's the earliest mummy that they had, late period. So we're talking about probably about that would have been like maybe about 600 years after Ramesses. So the oldest mummy they've got was 600 years after Ramesses. She was like, well, this is good enough for us to estimate the skin color of Ramesses. Yet we have this study by Anna Marie Makoto, which doesn't need to do any of that DNA crap, because we're trying to work out what skin color they are, what race they are. Remember, very simple thing. Who's tested 273. Now, in fairness, she didn't say every single one was that, but it was clearly enough to just kind of like make a group judgment. She's kind of like, well, I've tested all of these kind of mummies, and these are the sample set I've got, and they're all Negroid. And they're nobles from Thebes, certified Egyptians, certified Upper Egyptians, certified royalty. Certified, no debate, no discussion, and they're Negroid. That should be it. If at that point we're debating which study is more useful for us to ascertain the race of the ancient Egyptians, you know that you're not dealing with genuine people, you're dealing with disingenuous people, aren't you? Okay? You are dealing with disingenuous people, because if they can't take that and kind of ride with it, then that's the level, that's what you're dealing with. So I just have to make that very, very clear. This debate or discussion on that level, until they come up with a study that's more effective than a melanin density or melanin dosage study that will actually give you the actual complexion of the person, and will end altogether all debates about what race these people belong to. If they're willing to turn a blind eye to that, or not willing to acknowledge it, then you know that you're not dealing with genuine people. Because if you're going to basically conclude from those 3 mummies, there's 3 random mummies from a time of foreign rule, from a foreign tomb in ancient Egypt, that you're going to basically say this was the race of the ancient Egyptians, then I can take this Theban study and I can say, not only were the Egyptians in Thebes black, but all of the ancient Egyptians are black, and I've got more weight and more evidence than you do, isn't it? At least in my view. All right, let's carry on. We're nearly there. Melanin density studies prove the complexion of these nobles beyond the point of conjecture. Surely this should be considered as the most authoritative piece of evidence for complexion of Theban nobility. After all, decisions about complexion are being made in far more spurious, unscientific manner. The trend is suggestive that a presentist approach, applying the phenotype that is currently most popular in Alexandria, irrespective of the anthropological data, seems to be the precedence in matters of estimation. As with everything being proposed here, none of the anthropological data points stand alone. So I've got to make that clear. The fact that we have Negroid skin in Thebes, the fact that we have Negroid limb proportions from Amenhotep III himself, okay? None of this stands alone, but they work in concert with one another, where we should start to apply Occam's razor and say, well, look, he had the body of an African. He had his relatives or people in his bloodline had the skin of modern Africans, and his portraits all show him to be an African. Are we leaning towards something that's a bit more logical here? Indeed, his colour in portraiture matches the colour of choice given to most New Kingdom artwork of Amenhotep III. That is a deep, rich, dark brown in most cases. Would it not be prudent to use this corroborating anthropological data to corroborate these images as accurate? And I've given this a bit of a spread here of him in the same repeating, this one's a bit darker I would say, but the same repeating dark red brown tone. I'd say this one's darker because these ones are probably all faded, by the way. The red colour seemed to be the base colour that lasted most effectively. But anyway, that, even if that wasn't the case, this reddish brown is very, very common in Africa. You know what's actually hilarious as well? Cicero Moraes' rebuttal for this argument, because I made this argument in the last slide that I had. His rebuttal for the argument is, well, other people have taken images of this photo and they look lighter. And then he actually posted in his article, he actually posted this, an image where someone had basically taken the image of this same image of these heads. I remember I took these when I was in the Louvre, and I took them with no flash, and I was able to get these really good flat colored. This is exactly what they look like. He showed a picture of someone who'd clearly photoshopped him, because by the way, they do that all the time with Egyptian art. They always photoshop it. They change the brightness up. It's really sick and pathological, actually. All Eurocentrics do it, all Arab centrists do it. They'll take a picture of an ancient Egyptian that was, like, if you look at Google, in fact, as an exercise, you can all do this together, yeah? Google King Tut's Golden Throne or King Tut's Mannequin. Both of those artworks are, the complexion is dark brown with a reddish undertone. That is the color. The true color is dark brown with a reddish undertone. You will struggle to find one that doesn't look bright red. Not because the artwork is bright red, but because every single one posted to the net, people will change the exposure to make it look as red as possible. They all do it. It's disgusting. It's honestly disgusting, because when you see these images for yourself, you're like, why is no one taking the proper photos? Like, yeah, they have. It's just what they do with the mummies as well. They'll change the exposure, and all of these mummies which have got jet black skin, including Ramesses, most people think Ramesses has got red skin or pink skin, because everyone's been playing around with the exposure, trying to change the look of the. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, do that, you know, have some fun with that. I'm not going to go through each of these artworks. We've kind of looked at these before. I'm just going to move on to race and genetics, because I think this is one of the last arguments I make. In order to avoid going into exhaustive detail about this very broad topic, the subject of race should be broached and the term defined in order to place its attribution consistently. Oh gosh, this is embarrassing seeing somebody spelling there, sorry. In the context of the discussion, race by all measures is an arbitrary delimiter based on values that are attributed to aspects/expressions of phenotypic variety shared amongst the target group. It is utilized as a social and political tool to apply privilege or discrimination based on uncontrollable and largely unmodified aspects of one's appearance. It's important to note that. Okay. The application of racial thinking has unlimited elasticity depending on the desired outcome. So creating an objective demarcation as to when the term black or white should be applied is impossible, as this bloats and narrows for both groups through time as the agenda requires. Okay, I just want to see here what I put for footnote. So I put here the concept of racial thinking and approaches using received racial schema are part of a theoretical worldview deemed by most anthropologists to be incorrect and passé, but Leonard Lieberman and blah 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 indicate that racial thinking and the use of racial terms of categories still exist and are seen in sampling strategies used in studies addressing the origin of modern humans. So that's a quote from Cater 2011. As such, any references to black or white should be considered in the context of race being an entirely unscientific social construct with no value beyond providing a context for the political paradigms that are being expressed at a given time. So it's really important, okay? Because race, white could be something very broad or very narrow. It's very narrow when they want to apply privilege and very broad when they want to steal history. And it's the same thing as black. Black can be something very broad and very narrow. It's very narrow when they want to discuss matters of history, but very broad when they want to talk about things like reparations and stuff like that, which no one's going to get. So this is the thing. They like to change these definitions. Genetic studies can provide insights into the ancestry of ancient Egyptians, revealing a complex genetic makeup that can be interpreted in many ways. In many ways, genetic studies are not the conclusive and definitive punctuation mark that the general public often expects them to be, and I must stress that. Indeed, genetic studies are every bit as reliant on supporting anthropological data as forensic facial reconstructions, and I've said there should be. Okay, so neither of these fields should be approached independently and suggested to be the be-all and end-all when it comes to matters of history. There should just be tools within a broad spectrum of anthropology. Genetics only contribute to a broader picture painted by paleontology, archaeology, linguistics, and other disciplines. In his response paper of my initial critique of his work, Mr. Moraes falsely assumed that by highlighting genetic studies, I was proposing that race can be proven by genetic ancestry. Aside from the few alleles associated with complexion, the most prominent markers are shared across ethnicities are certainly not racially restricted, since many of the most prominent uniparental markers are shared by people of different ethnicities. And I go on to explain this. A perfect example of this can be seen in R1b Y-DNA lineage, which, by the way, I believe is the Moorish lineage, but I'm not going to go into that right now, which for its widespread propagation across Western Europe is in some cases defined as a European marker, falsely. However, this marker has widespread coverage across Central and Western Africa, so much so that it has led researchers to suggest an origination point for this lineage at that very location, namely Cameroon, Gonzalez 2012. As opposed to the widely acknowledged Western Asia or later designated European origination point. Needless to say, regardless of the marker's origination point, people who we would classify as wholly black and African, get this point everyone, needless to say, regardless of the marker's origination point, people who we would classify as wholly black and African by modern standards carry the marker, as do people who we would classify as white and European. And it's sensible to assume from the evidence that this has been the case for at least several thousands of years. Okay, so I want that point to really drive home. Same marker, people trying to classify it as European, this, that, and the other. But if black people have it, Asian people have it, Chinese people have it, and they all are thoroughly, like they would all do aside from that marker, they would all do a 23andMe test and come out either 100% African, 100% European, 100% something else, then you clearly see that there's no value in assigning race to these uniparental markers. The marker's origination point contributes nothing to discussion of the present or historical race of that individual or individuals in their ancestry. The studies in the case of Amenhotep III were based on autosomal DNA results drawn from the Armana lineage, including Amenhotep III. So this is important. He's actually in this test by Hawass and team for a study cited Ancestry and Pathology in Tutankhamun's Family, 2010. The DNA results were utilized to establish the relatedness of the Armana mummies and uncover details including, the pathology of the familial traits. DNA in the form of autosomal STR extracted from the royal lineage and published as part of the study. These results were repurposed by several independent research teams subsequent to being published in the 2010 study. This allowed researchers to ascertain genome-wide match probabilities by utilizing STR databases and comparing them with the results from existing populations. I'm going to carry on reading. Match probabilities provide a safer way to connect ethnicity to an individual than shared single ancestors. The POP affiliator tool, utilized by Jourdain and al., assigned this probability as percentage likelihood based on 3 target populations. So they use sub-Saharan, Eurasian and Asian, because that's what was used, what was fed by the POP affiliator tool that they used. The STR database utilized by DNA tribes was their own, based on autosomal DNA they themselves had obtained and analyzed, targeting regional continental populations and assigning match probability by a multiplication factor. In each case, STR database's job is not to calculate race or ancestry, but rather assign the match probability between 2 individuals, okay, or an individual and a specific group of individuals, in this case populations. I should have said that STR blah 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 only assigns a probability of the subject belonging to a living population on a genetic level. Now, there are inherent limitations in the results reflected in the limited number of loci. So 8 out of the 13. It wasn't like a super complete study, so it's important to note that, which is less than ideal for whole genome sequencing, and the methodology for DNA extraction having improved exponentially since the study. So these are 2 things that I'm willing to obviously note. All of these issues play a factor into how these results should be interpreted. Nonetheless, as can be seen in the studies published by DNA Tribes and Jourdain, Amenhotep III has a significantly high probability of belonging to the same ethnicity as modern Africans, particularly from the Great Lakes region. Now, the Great Lakes region is the entirety basically of Central East Africa. In the case of DNA tribes, he possessed a 222 times likelihood of belonging to Great Lakes region of Central East Africa, compared to just a 3 times probability of belonging to modern North African population. So that's like he was 70 times more likely basically to be Central East African or Great Lakes African than he was a Eurasian. 70 times more likely. That's 7,000%. That's off the charts. Whereas in the case of POP affiliated tool utilized by Jourdain, this match probability for sub-Saharan African was 93.7% compared to the 6% match probability of modern Eurasians. To note, even with access to the full 13 of 13 loci, because we only had 8 of the 13, remember, this percentage could only reduce or increase from its current position, but in either case would remain significantly high due to the number of alleles which are found throughout Central Africa but are comparatively rare, this is a quote, or entirely absent in the rest of the world. That's a quote from DNA Tribes. So even if we had 13 of the 13, the results wouldn't suddenly change and Africa would suddenly go low and the other one would shoot up. No, it would only add to the current results. So it would either bring up some of the other results to be maybe slightly below or in line with the African, or the African one could shoot off even further. So the point being, there's no arguing against the significant Africanity of Amenhotep III based on these 2 studies. So this is the DNA Tribes one, and you can see Amenhotep III is here. I'm just going to highlight his column there. 222 times more likely to be at African Great Lakes. Okay. North African 3.39, Northwest European 3.99. So very low, well, comparatively in these other areas. And then if we have a look at the Jourdain study, Amenhotep III is this line along here. You can see it's 93. I know you can barely see that, guys. In fact, there's no way you'll be able to see that, but trust me, bro. It's 93.7% sub-Saharan and only 6% Eurasian. Okay, massive differences. These results cannot and should not stand in isolation due to the inherent limitations of this, and by extension any genetic study, and I stress that. Okay, so I'm not letting this stand alone and going, oh, yes, it's significant, but once again, let's see it in the context of all of this other anthropology that we've been covering, okay? And what is the likelihood of this all being coincidence? You know, he just happens to have black African limb proportions and just happens to be from a region where they've tested and they had negroid skin, and just happens to have portraits that show him as being dark brown, and just happens to have very, very super black African DNA in terms of the populations he's related to. That's a lot of coincidence, isn't it? It's a lot of coincidence piling on top of each other. Coincidence after coincidence after, to the point where you just have to go, okay, if I was a logical person, I would say we've got sufficient data to suggest that this person is a black African. However, these are significant results from a phylogenetic perspective, which can't be overwritten by local ancestry results or uniparental lineages which focus on single ancestors, who oftentimes date back tens of thousands of years, thus greatly reducing their impact on the individual's phenotype and genotype. When this STR data is taken in concert with the anthropological data already discussed, the match probabilities only reconfirm the picture already being painted, alluding to the king's ethnicity as a native African. It should be noted that the same genetic data was utilized, but for a different purpose, by a member of the multinational team, Michael Habich, in his paper about the royal mummies of ancient Egypt. So as it stands, there haven't been any serious challenges to the authenticity of the DNA extracted by Hawass. So I mentioned that because Michael Habich literally just posted this paper, and he's utilized the exact same 2010 DNA studies to argue about, to basically make points about relationships between some of the unknown mummies. But the point being is that DNA data is still being used in 2024. So this just validates those studies. So as long as he's using the same data, the same outcomes, then these results stay, okay? They remain relevant. I want to see how far we are until we get to the next part where I wanted to move on to. Just having a look. Okay, discussion. So it's coming up soonish. Let me see. Look at that time. It's 10:30. I feel like I'm gonna finish this section. Okay. I hope you're still with me, guys. I know it's late, and some of you will tune out, but I'm just gonna finish this section. Hopefully, cultural and artistic evidence. Artwork remains a substantial primary source of data, and how a historical society choose to portray themselves should never be disregarded in favor of a practice that openly admits that it relies on portraiture for accuracy. Okay, and that's forensic facial reconstruction. It's stated quite clearly on multiple papers, including this one, 2018, by Carolyn Wilkerson, that they rely on portraiture for accuracy. The practice of seeking to overwrite established anthropological data pertaining to the subject by promoting a false idea in the absence of supporting anthropological data, one can create an accurate portrait of an individual from the skull alone, contradicts the established protocols of the field of forensic facial reconstruction. I have to stress that. Thank you, Joy, for just saying we are still here. I appreciate you. I needed that vote of confidence. I was doubting myself there. Thank you. Indeed, it's promoted that if the reconstruction team have an individual skull, that they have all they need to assume the individual's appearance without any anthropological corroboration. Mr. Moraes himself states, when he previously has conducted blind reconstructions, he has been given valuable anthropological data. Okay, stating, I had the opportunity to reconstruct faces in blind tests where I received only the skull with estimated data on sex, age range, and ancestry. So that's, yeah, you're being given the anthropology here that we're saying is important. We're saying, please look at the portraits, okay? Get an idea of the age range and ancestry from the portraits. No, skull is enough for me. I know it's a very English accent. I said done a Brazilian one, but then don't want to be racist. I can be, I can be bad against English. I am English. He also states in the same paper, there are professionals in this area who are excellent reconstructors for Caucasians, Negroes, or Malays. An artist is rarely good in all ancestries. Now, this is a really important point, okay? Because he acknowledges, look, you're not going to be good at it all. And I'm going to put my hand up here and say that's absolutely the truth, okay? It's absolutely the truth. I'm really good, or I'll say really good. I've got a specialism in creating African faces. I can look at the ancient Egyptians and see which kind of face that is. Okay, most African people, and this is why I say African people need to be involved, have that same skill because we've been surrounded by that. But if you was to put me in and ask me to make a bunch of Greek reconstruct, well, I'm not saying Greek is not much, English reconstructions, of paintings of English monarchs, I wouldn't be any good at that. Okay, I haven't picked up the nuance in that area. All right. Mr. Moraes has a skill set. It's not in creating Africans. And this is one of the big, and he's acknowledged that here, but he ignores it when it comes to him doing the work on the ancient Egyptians. So Mr. Moraes is entirely aware of his inherent limitations of constructing without an anthropological basis and the need to have clear ethnographic data to produce a believable approximation. Yet in his approximations for historical figures, he suddenly has carte blanche to discard this valuable and necessary data. This is entirely fallacious, and no reconstruction would agree, I should say artist, no reconstruction artist would agree with such an approach. It is well known within the field that work is greatly enhanced and ultimately dependent on supporting anthropological data to make the correct decisions regarding phenotype. I can't stress that enough. Okay, this is pseudo science, as some people love to use that term. It is definitely pseudoscientific to just say I can do it all with the skull and not know nothing else about the person. That's rubbish. It's impossible. In this case, Egyptian art and cultural artifacts consistently, and particularly in the New Kingdom, depict figures with African features. I said see figure 2.5. Let me see what figure that is. Okay, so that's this one, showing all the faces of Amenhotep there. Well, just a nice spread so you can just see like this is a very African man. All right, it's really hard. How are you gonna look at this one, for instance? How are you gonna look at that? Or how are you gonna look at that? Or how are you gonna look at that? How are you gonna look at any of these? How are you gonna look at that? Oh my Lord, how are you going to look at this, and be like, yeah, dude was Slovakian. Come on, man. This is ridiculous. So anyway, let me go back up. Where was I? The sheer self-delusion, compromise and damage to one's professional integrity that one must conform to transmute this detailed and visibly African portraiture into illustrations of modern Europeans, such as those produced by Brunton, and I should say Moraes, is concerning. Even more concerning is that widely inaccurate depictions still seem to be referenced by professionals throughout Egyptology and related disciplines, including the field of forensic facial reconstruction. So I mentioned that because in her paper, Carolyn Wilkerson has got one of Brunton's paintings. It's like, what are we're still using Brunton in 2023, the woman who made them all into Greeks, where Brunton's outdated propaganda pieces have been referenced favourably during the reconstruction of Ramesses II. This is part and parcel of the problem that we are attempting to highlight with this paper. I just want to give a big shout out to Jose. Why have you retracted your statement, Jose? You need to say something so I can thank you. All right. Maybe you're still writing, maybe you're editing it, so I'll give you a chance to edit it. But thank you very much for your $20 donation. I really appreciate it. In the case of Amenhotep III, who is one of the most excessively portrayed individuals in ancient Egyptian history, we have a plethora of examples, with a vast majority of portraying a consistent physical phenotype with features that fall into the same position with the same proportions on the face. And that's actually really important to state. So remember, I was showing you earlier how he traces from youth to adulthood, and people see, okay, there's a lot of different statues going on, but bear in mind, this is a time before photographs. So before photographs, it would have been sculptures, okay? And if people are sculpting you for your age, think about if someone sculpted you as a child as opposed to in middle age and when you're a really old man. It's got to look like you have to be aware of the way an African face changes to pick up on that nuance. And that's why I was able to show you that image at the very start, okay? I was able to show you that image at the very start to say, look, Amenhotep as a child, middle age, gained a bit of weight, but the facial features, everything is still falling in the same place. That is the same individual. It's not like different people, and that's really important to note. So strongly suggesting that differences in the appearance of the statues were deliberate portrayals of changes in age or fluctuations in weight, or in some cases both. The differences in a vast majority of the portraiture were natural differences one would expect with a change in age, weight, and artist. So bear in mind, artists are going to have different expressions as well, but the most remain consistent portrayals of the same individual. The differences in the statues have been erroneously dramatized into a fabricated ideology of the widespread practice of iconoclasm, with Egyptologists proposing that pharaohs constantly claimed statues that didn't belong to them. I haven't seen much evidence of this. Oh yes, Ramesses just put his name on that statue, it didn't belong to him. Okay, well, why does it look like all the other statues of Ramesses? That's a load of rubbish. Don't come to me with all this black people look the same rubbish. I'm not here for it. Seemingly to some, all ancient Egyptian statues look the same. This wanton disregard for detail and nuance in many ways reeks of the racial intolerance and binary ideology imposed on Africans currently. The true Negro, one type of African trope, once again rears its ugly head. Seemingly broad noses and thick lips are all the same to many non-African observers. Point being, one can see the difference between the artworks with very minimal effort. However, in isolation of our own reimaginings, one can simply observe the considerable amount of artwork depicting skin color, facial features, limb proportions, and even cultural accessories from hair to dress code that are present in the same populations of the Nile Valley to this very day. Okay. The consistency of artwork of Amenhotep III draws into question the largely unsupported claim that the ancient Egyptian artwork should be entirely discarded as not resembling the kings. Okay, and that's what Moraes said 2024, since in order to explain the consistency exhibited over a lifetime of the artworks, one would have to propose that 1. A lifelong body double was being used. So if you're going to say, oh, well, it was just standardized and didn't matter, then you have to explain why it looks like the same person's being tracked throughout. If the portrait truly looked like Moraes's reconstruction of Amenhotep III and not that big-lipped, dark brown-skinned African, you know, that we see up here, yeah, if he actually looked like that pale-skinned person that Moraes made, then he must have a lifelong body double that was being used for all of his portraits. How else would one logically explain the phenotypic consistency seen in portraits of single pharaohs? Most who have been studying Egyptian artwork are able to identify monarchs instantly by their portraits. I know many of you on this channel can do that. Okay, you can just look at the portrait and go, oh, that's such and such. Right, regardless of the age during the sitting, this would be impossible if they all randomly claim statues that did not belong to them, as has been fabricated, I should say, by the Egyptologists. Next, the monarchs were happy to spend a considerable amount of time and resources funding megalithic portraits that looked nothing like them. Imagine the thought process behind that. I'm going to pay for something that's going to look nothing like me. The irony of claiming Egyptian rulers were vain and despotic. Oh no, why is it doing that? It's my battery again. Oh. Oh, am I back? I'm looking at my thing. It looks like I'm back. I think I'm back. My YouTube Creator Studio hasn't launched yet, but it feels like I'm streaming again. I think I can see myself. Yeah, I can. I think I'm back. Oh, am I back? Let's mute that. I'm looking at my thing. It looks like I'm back. Oh, so let's mute that right down. Okay, boom, I'm back because I can hear myself through my thing. I hope I didn't lose too many of you guys. I think I did. Lost at least 100 of you. Thanks for oh man, counts on it. Okay, let's carry on. Thank you guys, those of you who stayed, appreciate it. Let's where do we get up to? I'm gonna scroll down. Let's just carry on because we're not too far from wrapping up today anyway. So yeah, very much appreciate you guys. We've got past there. We did that. We've done well. I'll tell you that much. We've done the genetic and there. Boom. Done the that part. Cultural. Okay. I think we were here. I think we were here. No, 1 second. Maybe we got further than that. Yeah, we got. Yeah. We were here. Looked at some of those. Large scale. Oh no, we didn't get to the numbers. Don't think. 1 second. Oh yeah, lifelong body double. We did that. Monarchs happy to spend. Yes, that's who we were. I think we. Yes. Okay, so that's who we were. Point 2. Let's start from here. God damn. Sorry. The monarchs were happy to spend a considerable amount of time and resources funding megalithic portraits that look nothing like them. The irony of claiming Egyptian rulers were vain and despotic to claim statues that didn't belong to them and take part in iconoclasm by defacing rival pharaohs while simultaneously commissioning large-scale portraiture that looked conspicuously like their neighbours to the south. How you let's just make statues that look like the black people to the south. The contrast between Mr Moraes' reconstruction and Amenhotep's actual portraits, which are consistent within themselves, borders on lunacy. Okay, it's insane that they would make portraits that look like that. Borders on lunacy. There's no historical precedence for monarchs commissioning portraits that bear no resemblance to them. None. So I had to really drive home that point. And the monarchs, not for the first time in ancient Egyptian history, seemed to fetishize their African neighbours. Okay, and they seem to do this across the board, isn't it? If it wasn't brown skin, thick lips, they seem to have a fetish for African hair as well, consistently portraying African traits, hair, and features in their portraiture. Contrary to Wilkinson's false claim that Nubians were depicted with curly hair, which is just not true. By contrast, Nubians and Kushites are the only other groups of people regularly depicted with identical hairstyles to the ones codified in Egyptian hierarchy. Why would Egyptians never once depict themselves with their natural hair? Never. Why they, if their natural hair was this kind of like, why did they never depict their hair like that? Why have they always got African hairstyles? When I asked that question, have I lost my mouse? Oh, my battery's dead. It's all going. Sorry, just bear with me. I had to plug my wireless mouse has just lost its juice. Where's my cable? Not that one. Sorry, bear with me. I've got a specific cable that's dedicated to that, and it's just decided to hide itself. Is it this one here? Nope, it's not that one. This one? No. One of those days. Why is this room so dark? This is annoying. Where are you? God, I can't find my normal cable. I have to use this one. Should work. Got a dedicated cable that I use for charging my mouse. That seems to be missing. This one should work. Right, if I put it in the right way. That's good. There we go. Okay, that should work. Are we back? Yeah, we're back. What timing? Yes, in this bizarre realm of Egyptology, it's more logical to assume this crazy set of circumstances than to apply Occam's razor and assume that they were Africans who depicted themselves as they appeared to themselves and others. You know, let's just apply all of this random logic and explanations for what you could just turn around and say, oh, yeah, well, they're clearly Africans because they did all this stuff. It's crazy, you know. Amenhotep III here wears a typical Egyptian hairstyle. So I've depicted him here. You can see it here, more than one depiction. The hairstyle is referred to as the tiled style by Tassi. Is actually a common hairstyle practiced across Africa, created by twisting the hair into individual loose locks. The Afar tribe of Ethiopia provide a regional example of the style. Bottom right, you can compare our reconstruction of Amenhotep III, who comes complete with reddish brown skin. Look at that. Skin complexion, check. Hairstyle, check. Uraeus, check. Regional qualifications, check. Have a look at the skin complexion, check. How much more do you need? Do we really need to jump through all of these hoops? Mr. Moraes, were you not aware that people like this existed? Was that enough for you? Is this not enough for, if this image isn't enough for you to revise your entire approach, Mr. Moraes, then I don't know what is. That means that you are operating to an agenda. I'm sorry. And that brings us to the discussion and the methodological area, which brings us to the close of this live stream, because that's 3 hours. You've done very, very well. Thank you for sticking with me in that interval as well. I really, really appreciate it. But I want you to be fresh for this next section, because this next section is when I really come for the jugular in terms of the approach taken specifically by the multinational team and Mr. Moraes. But I want to be fresh when I go through it with you. So I'm not going to start that now. I'm going to put a part 2 in, like I said I will do. In fact, we're going to have probably a few live streams, because I'm going to put the part 2 in. We'll get the paper finished, definitely, in the part 2 when we go through the methodological flaws. And then I think we'll have another live stream attacking the new paper he's just released, and that I'm not gonna and that reconstruction of Ramesses II he's just released, which I put out a post, and I'm quite open about the fact that I believe it's a direct response to A, the work that we do on this channel, and B, my reconstruction of Ramesses. He had no reason to a reconstruction of Ramesses, though. Like I said, Carolyn Wilkinson literally just did one, you know, around a year ago. It was clearly a knee-jerk reaction, and he's actually contradicted himself a lot. So a lot of the stuff that he said, he's U-turned on. I'm going to expose, okay? And to be honest with you, it's just providing me more fuel to do more papers like this. So yeah, looking forward to that. Macy, thank you very much for your very, very generous contribution. Another $5 from you. Thank you. So they're so used to falsifying history that it's hard for them to be challenged. Absolutely. They do not. I can tell you right now, like I said, I will commend him in that we have very open discourse, but I tell you right now, he doesn't like being challenged. And one of the things that I've noted is I'm going to call it as I see it. I don't really mince my words. There's an arrogance in terms of when I'm dealing with him, because I can tell that he's not used to being wrong. But he's made some very, very glaring errors on numerous occasions now. And a more humble person would just turn around and go, okay, he got me there. And yeah, he hasn't done that once. So I'm not expecting, he doesn't seem like the kind of person who's going to revise his processes based on the criticism and the very, very clear debunking that we're giving him. In fact, in his mind, based on that paper that he produced, he thinks he's won this debate. He thinks, oh, I refuted you. I was like, dude, we went through your paper in a live stream. All due respect, I don't blow my own horn too often, but we destroyed you. Yeah, we destroyed your paper, mate. Yeah, it wasn't even difficult. You know, we didn't break a sweat. We sat here and we debunked every single one of your arguments, and it was quite easy to do. You know, you didn't refute anything. And so he's come up with this new one, this new Ramesses II reconstruction, and that's got quite a lengthy paper with it, but we'll do the same with that, because like I said, it's not hard to refute, you know, people when they, like I said, if your entire premise of your argument is to make polemic arguments against my argument, it means you have no argument of your own. And that's what I'm seeing in what he's producing. You don't have any argument. There's no strength in your position. Your whole entire argument is based on saying you're wrong. They weren't. You're not proposing anything. We're out here proposing, you know, something with anthropological evidence to back it, and your only position is to try and, you know, remove the credibility of the several forms of anthropology that were given you, but you're not taking those forms of anthropology and saying, oh, actually, he had supranegro limb proportions, but they could be interpreted as Eurasian, because you can't. You can't turn around and say, oh, well, you have the skin samples that were Negroid, but, you know, that they could have been Negroid whites. You know, you can't. All you can do is say, oh, the skin samples, that doesn't prove anything, you know. So they can't win. This is not the kind of dudes moving like Drake in that Kendrick beef. You win for that one. I'm sorry. You win. That comment wins. Straight up and down. He's like, yeah, I plan this all. I plan this all, man. Oh Lord. Okay, sorry, that got me sweet. That sweet me nicely. All right, yeah. So, you know, I'm looking forward to it. Okay. We're gonna carry on debunking. And I'm actually glad we got to this stage now where he's actually feeling the need to provide some anthropological support. I feel like we've helped him to increase. I will obviously take off my hat and say, look, I wouldn't have written this paper, certainly not this soon. I've always thought about writing the paper, but I certainly wouldn't have written this paper this soon. If he hadn't, he basically said to me, look, write a paper, you know, you got a problem with my work, write a paper. And I was like, bet. I'll do that. Sounds like fun. So I wouldn't have done it if he hadn't put that challenge out. So I do appreciate when people do stuff like that, because it's kind of like, it has opened me up to an entirely new world that I'm exposed to now, and it's got me thinking about getting published in anthropological journals and all of this stuff that I wasn't thinking about before. And also on the benefit side, like I said, the whole idea, like, it feels logical to me. It's kind of like, okay, it's great, I do love having this channel, but stuff like this is invaluable. This could get, you know, once this is finished and properly, you know, published, you know, people can quote this. And I even think about even unpublished studies like DNA Tribes Jordan study that I've referenced in this paper, and I've referenced so many other times. How valuable have they been to our progress in this field? Infinitely valuable. So it's great that I can, you know, produce something that perhaps other researchers and scholars can utilize the research that I've done and maybe make that journey a bit easier or a bit shorter for them. So yeah, absolutely loving it. Yeah, thanks guys. I really appreciate the comments of support, and I'm glad you've enjoyed this live stream. I'm going to call it a day now. I'm going to put part 2, probably post it. It's a bit late here, I'm gonna go to bed, I'm not gonna lie, but probably post it very, very soon, maybe like tomorrow evening. I might not do it tomorrow evening because I've got a very packed day tomorrow, but I think maybe like sometime Tuesday, latest Wednesday, we'll do part 2, and then we'll get the other live stream in, tackling his new paper and Ramesses the second reconstruction soon. So yeah, thank you. Macy said you should write a series of books with evidence and photos. Yeah, I will. I've actually got, like, I wrote this paper in Google Docs, obviously, but I've actually just got like a big spread of papers that I've kind of partially started each of them now, and I can see myself doing a lot of writing. But it does, as you guys can also see, it does take a hit on my productivity on the channel, which is hard for me because I don't like I don't like not being as productive on the channel. So it's finding that balance and the time, obviously, between, you know, my full-time job, getting this other stuff done. But obviously you guys are very great motivation, so I appreciate you all. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you all very soon. Thanks guys, take care, bye.